This is a regular meeting of the Board of Education. Can we all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have 4 items before us on the agenda: swearing in new members, election of officers, public hearing, and then we'll go to the main event, which is really what the meeting's about, but just budget. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as submitted? Dr. Francis, Ms. Dayton, all those in favor? 8-0. Okay. That Ms. Budkins is going to swear in new board members. So you guys can all go over there to the podium.
I believe Peter Scher and Peter Bernstein also have to be sworn in. Will you all please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that you will faithfully discharge, according to law, your duties as members of the Board of Education of the Town of Greenwich to the best of your abilities, so help you God? Congratulations. Thank you. Your card.
Yeah, I don't know who's. Yeah. I think, is your family here too? Yeah.
No,
Just Megan.
just the Olsons.
Yeah, just the Olsons.
You want to give away Olsons?
Love your hair.
Right, my friend.
Looks great. It's nice to have the families here. Families actually are the secret behind all of this. They give so much, so for those of us who can serve. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see Peter's family. Are they here too?
Yep, behind.
There. My family's at home. So. Yeah, they're used to this. But welcome. With that, we need to elect officers. Just as a point of privilege, it's been a pleasure to serve the board this year. As many of you know, I was a reluctant choice. I hope tonight that the board will select some people that everybody can kind of get behind, so we don't, hopefully ever again in the time that I'm here, have a repeat of what we've gone through the past couple of years. But I'm sure that'll happen. With that, Lauren Rabin, our secretary, will essentially manage the election of board officers. Our first job is to elect our chairman, and then we'll elect our vice chairman, and then we'll elect our secretary. And then we'll proceed on with the meeting. Okay.
So I think I will entertain nominations for chair. Ms. Dayton?
With great pleasure, I nominate Peter Bernstein for chair.
Do we have a second?
And I second that nomination.
Okay, mark your sheets that have your name on it. Sorry, any other nominations for chair? Okay. So nominations are closed. From Dr. Francis, Peter Bernstein. From Barbara O'Neill, Peter Bernstein. Megan Olson, Peter Bernstein. Peter Bernstein, Peter Bernstein. Lauren Rabin, Peter Bernstein. Peter Scher, abstaining, not voting. Kathleen Stowe, Peter Bernstein. And Jennifer Dayton, Peter Bernstein. So that would be 7-0-0. Okay, the next position is Vice Chair. Do we have any nominations for Vice Chair? Dr. Francis?
I'm very pleased to nominate Jennifer Dayton for Vice Chair.
Do we have a second? Mr. Bernstein?
I second the nomination.
Any other nominations for Vice Chair? So nominations are closed. If you can mark your sheets with your name. From Lauren Rabin, Jennifer Dayton. Jennifer Dayton for Vice Chair. Dr. Francis, Jennifer Dayton. Barbara O'Neill, Jennifer Dayton. Peter Scher, not voting. Kathleen Stowe, Jennifer Dayton. And Megan Olson, Jennifer Dayton. And Peter Bernstein, Jennifer Dayton. So Jennifer Dayton is Vice Chair with a vote of 7-0-0. And our next officer position, Secretary. Do we have a nomination for Secretary? Mr. Bernstein? Do we have a second? Second. Any other nominations for Secretary? So nominations are closed. Okay, the vote. Jennifer Dayton, Barbara O'Neill, Secretary. Dr. Francis, Barbara O'Neill, Secretary. Barbara O'Neill, Barbara O'Neill. Megan Olson, Barbara O'Neill, Secretary. Kathleen Stowe, Barbara O'Neill. Peter Bernstein, Barbara O'Neill. Peter Scher, not voting. Lauren Rabin, not voting. So Barbara is Secretary 600.
All right, if you give us one quick moment, we're going to teach a new secretary how to use the timer because the next session is public hearing. All right, we have very complicated technology. All right, the next order of business is our public hearing. We have looks like we have 2 people set to speak together. We've got 10 speakers tonight. First up, Ashley Cole and George Cole. After that, it's Heidi Martins, maybe? Each speaker has 3 minutes.
My husband is stuck on the train, apparently. Does that mean I can have a total of 6? No?
You can always email the board with your comments.
Okay, I was told I could extend it that way, and that's not true. I want to confirm that. I cannot have...
No, you cannot.
All right. Well, here's the hatchet version. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ashley Cole. I live at 11 Hillside, right across from Greenwich High School. But before I begin, a shout out for the Greenwich High School football team. You see, we neighbors, we're parents too. And as a matter of fact, my own 2 boys were on that very football team. So we get it. We love kids, we love sports, we love our town. Yet Greenwich High School has increasingly encroached on our fragile and historic neighborhood and has become a difficult neighbor. We have given concession after concession, and yet they still want more. But we're not your enemy here. Parents, you have every right to be angry, furious even. The disrespect shown to student athletes this year has been obvious and profound. But the problem here isn't the neighbors. It's your Board of Education. It is the BOV who has created this awful situation of entirely foreseeable consequences to their decisions. You could fairly say that this time change thing has been bungled, with a capital B. So now that they have created the problem, the BOV wants us to upend our lives to cover for their mistakes. And now they want to renege on their own contract with us. Who could possibly trust the Board of Education in the town of Greenwich after this? Let's look at what is happening in Greenwich. Brunswick School is planning ahead for their future. Greenwich Country Day School is planning their expansion and future with a merge with Stanwich School. Where is the long-term planning by the Greenwich Board of Education? Oh yeah, there hasn't been any. This campus has been maxed out. These fields operate 7 days a week. When I moved to Hillside Road, there were no night games and only natural fields that held a few games a week. It's time for the members of the BOV to act like the leaders they purported to be, and it's time to come up with a long-term plan. But for right now, let me tell you how to fix things. Number 1, repeal immediately your last meeting's decree to open litigation against the 2003 court order. You won't win it. It only makes you look
30
foolish.
seconds.
And it sets a horrible precedent for this town. Go back to the original school start time or change block change for students. Temporarily light fields at CMS and Havemeyer. And now begin to seriously consider and plan for a new facility. It's time for the children of Greenwich to have a new, clean, and environmentally safe athletic campus. It's time to stop trying to cram everything in at 10 Hillside Road.
Time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Heidi, first initial M.
Matonis.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Heidi Matonis. I live at 47 Hillside Road, and I want to say as neighbors, we are deeply resentful that we feel like we're being painted as the bad guys because of the poor planning. I don't know what the 23 meetings about the late start time, what the concurrence on those was, how this whole situation ever came about. We're rather befuddled. But one thing I'd really like to point out, when I was at the meeting at the Greenwich High School, the word safety was thrown around a lot, and I really, really resented that. Because actually Dr. Gildea herself said, because of the safety of our children, I vote to litigate. Well, we all know football is a really dangerous game, and it has physical consequences, and now we know about CTE. And I just don't believe as parents, safety is the issue here. I think it's ego. And I think to use safety in the dialogue of lights is deceptive and misleading and highly emotional. And I'd like it taken out of the dialogue because I don't think it is lights on the field is a safety issue per se. I think the start time is the issue and poor planning.
Thank you. The next speaker is Karen Hirsch. And after that is Elizabeth Dempsey.
Apologize for my laptop. Printer is broken. My name is Karen Hirsch, President of PTA Council of Greenwich. We would like to congratulate the two returning members of the Board of Education, Peter Bernstein and Peter Scherer, on their re-election, and to welcome our two newest members, Megan Olson and Kathleen Jordan Stone. We'd also like to congratulate our new chair, Peter Bernstein, Vice Chair Jennifer Dayton, Secretary Barbara O'Neill on their new roles. We look forward to having the opportunity to work together with you to advocate for and serve the educational and social and emotional needs of our over 9,000 students and families. To give you a simple reminder of who PTA Council is and what we are tasked with doing, Greenwich PTA Council is the umbrella organization made up of the 15 different PTAs of Greenwich Public Schools operating across the district at elementary, middle school, and high school levels, along with the Council's 14 committees. PTA Council, along with its member PTAs, is also a member of the Connecticut PTA and National PTA and works to support their resolutions and mission statements and uphold their mission to educate, inform, and motivate their members to advocate for the educational success, health, and well-being of our children. In addition to our member PTAs, Council also oversees 14 committees, which oversee diverse topics such as green schools, academic excellence, and curriculum enrichment. By organizing at a district level, we believe that an informed and coordinated leadership at PTA and committee levels will lead to a greater organization and consistency and cooperation. We take our roles as advocates seriously, and Council's prior comments to the board this year have focused on the 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and consistency, the importance of parent and community engagement, and helping parents, students, and the district put together the pieces of the educational puzzle. We believe that an informed and coordinated set of PTA volunteers hopefully positions all of our PTAs for success at every level across all membership schools. Greenwich has one of the highest PTA membership rates in the state, and we believe that one of the most active and successful districts. The diligence and hard work shown by our PTA volunteers on a daily level helps to enrich the activities and education of the students entering our schools, keeps the member families informed about numerous topics of interest, and focuses on strategic partnerships with administrators, teachers, and others on academic opportunities to lead to more positive outcomes on both an academic and social and emotional level for our students. Again, we appreciate and look forward to having the opportunity to work together with you to help enable our students to reach and expand their potential and prepare them to become productive, responsible, ethical, and compassionate members of the society. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Elizabeth Dempsey, and after that, Claire Kilgallen.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Dempsey. I'm at 21 Hillside Road. I am a parent of 2 student athletes who have gone D1. So a lot of these issues have really resonated with me. My kids have been in public and private schools here in Greenwich. And one of the common issues that I've seen with what's been going on with the fields is process. And I just wanted to say a quick note about that. I moved here in 2000, so I watched the 2003 process, and I with an email, a hurried email on a Thursday before a meeting arranged on Monday, jumped into the lights issue, and wanted to suggest that if you all do look back, and I think you all did say that you spent an entire summer looking at stipulations and legal agreements, I appreciate the amount of work you had to put into this for what are some serious issues. You will remember that in the 2003 agreement, the court order talked about process, and I would only urge you to consider changing the pattern of how you all do what you do instead of rushing through things. One example, I would say, was really disheartening to have board members on the Tuesday meeting in the Central Middle School gym, that was on the 14th, state that they couldn't talk to neighbors, so they were going to vote to litigate. That was really a problem for me since I did come to the meeting on Monday. Delighted to have any of you talk to us at any time. None of my neighbors have been contacted other than the rushed meeting that was hastily arranged. So the doors are open in terms of process. In 2003, one of the things that the court ordered was that the process needed to follow certain rules. And we as a school district and a town operate on rules. We teach our students to follow the rules. And in that, I would refer you to the town section 99, which talks about municipal improvements. And I understand tonight that you are considering how you're going to light fields and possibly propose something. And I just want to remind you that there's clear stipulations, and I can read it if you want,
30 seconds.
About going through the RTM or having a commission-approved idea. So I'm concerned about why you're having this meeting now to talk about lights. And again, there's a 30-day notice period for neighbors that we would suggest that you adhere to. And if you need the section 99, I'm happy to give it to you after this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Clara Kilgallen. After that, Maria Merrill and Ann Fetch.
Good evening, Chairman Bernstein, members of the board, and Superintendent Gilday. I'm Claire Kilgallen, the co-president of New Lebanon PTA. I'm here to speak on a budget matter. We are requesting that the New Lebanon Media Assistant position be expanded from 17 and a half hours to 25 hours a week to accommodate the position's extensive responsibilities that have evolved over the years. Every other school has actually a full-time media assistant, and we've raised this over the past several years. The New Lebanon Media Center functions exactly as does every other media center in the school system. The roles and responsibilities are the same. Each media assistant must complete a number of weekly activities: shelving, weeding, circulation, overdues, laminating, book cover, book orders, cataloging, book processing, destiny changes, iPad rollout, organizing and labeling, maintaining the collection, shelf reading, creating resource lists, pulling books, book displays, bulletin boards in the media center, hallway, school entryway, among others. Just to give you a comparison from last year, North Miamis, which is a far larger school, had over 700 checkouts. The smallest school had 635, where New Lebanon had checkouts at 790. Our part-time media assistant deals with 390 active patrons. There's been an increase with students and teachers and support staff, and oversees a media center with over 13,000 items. This collection is actually larger than North Street at around 12,000, and New Lebanon lacks the parent volunteer support that other schools with full-time media assistants rely upon to shelve on a regular basis. And due to the expansion in Lebanon's literacy program, dozens of books are being circulated to classrooms. There's a lot of work with that. Other recent additions to the program are acquisition of tech devices that requires extensive attention of the media center staff, the creation and implementation of the innovation space within the center. Oftentimes the center is left unmanned due to outside obligations of the position. During these times, teacher and student needs go unmet, and the media assistant's position's responsibilities are far too extensive to be accomplished in a 17 and a half hour time span. as witnessed by every other school in the system employing a full-time person. And this is a request that's been made at the school level over the past several years with prior superintendents.
30 seconds.
It's been the subject of numerous conversations at both the PTA and the Havemeyer level, and all we've been told continuously is that, from HR, is that it's, quote, being worked on. So we would appreciate your consideration of expanding the hours for this position. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. The next speakers are Maria Merrill and Ann Fetch. After that, Marianne Terry.
Hello, as many of you know, my name is Maria Merrill, and this is Ann Fetch, and we are the co-presidents of the Greenwich High School PTA. We are here tonight to continue to advocate for the renovation of the locker rooms at Greenwich High School. We were glad to see it on the capital budget for this coming year. We have stood here before you numerous times over the past several years on this topic, as we hear frequent feedback from parents on the state of the girls' and boys' locker rooms at Greenwich High School. I honestly do not think they have been touched since the building was erected in 1970. The showers are antiquated in their format as group showers, and often many are not working. The toilet and sink areas are quite run down and minimalistic and do not feel on par with the remainder of the facilities in this town. I know that a few years ago, several of the board members toured the locker rooms and agreed that the locker room should be high on the priority list. I'm sure that Dr. Winters and Mr. Lundeen would be happy to give a tour to our new board members. We were under the impression that the work was starting last summer, or that at least the fixtures were being ordered and that the entire project would be completed this coming summer. We hope that is still the case. It is important to keep a focus on this project and make sure that this renovation is completed as soon as possible. What we have now is subpar, and each and every student at GHS spends time in the locker room due to the PE requirements that span all 4 years. This space should feel bright, sanitary, and functional. Improving and updating the locker rooms will benefit each and every student in the Greenwich Public Schools, and we urge you to keep it a top priority. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, Marianne Terry.
Good evening. I'm Marianne Ayuteri. I am a sophomore at Greenwich High School and a 7th grader at Eastern Middle School. Thank you. So here I am again. This is my second time in the 24 years I've lived in this town that I've addressed this board. My first time was successful, so I'm hoping that I'm on a streak. And I want to thank the board for voting to open up the litigation against Mr. Efros, not the neighbors, Mr. Efros. The prior speaker regarding the egos of the football parents is a bit misplaced. All sports are affected with the safety of our school and the safety of our fields and the lack of lighting. But I welcome the opportunity to speak with those parents individually outside of this meeting. In any reason, the reason why I'm here is, what do we do come September of 2018? We all know the litigation is going to take years. That's not going to resolve the problem for the fall. I know many parents from our athletic parents do not want to be in the same position. They do not want to feel the same frustration at the board's lack of responsiveness. So I'm asking the following: that your capital budget needs to include plans to develop additional alternatives for our student athletes to practice and play their chosen sports. The Board of Education needs to pursue options of properties directly under the control of the Board of Education. Greenwich High School, Central Middle School, for examples. As one of the parents of the Greenwich Parents for Student Athletes, all athletes, we demand that your capital budget include the installation and use of bubbles on field 6 and 7. This is a temporary measure, but a solid option for our student athletes for next year. It will ensure safety, lighting, and a space with minimal intrusion. We demand that your capital budget include the creation of a new facility with turf fields and lighting, specifically Central Middle School. These actions need to be addressed in this upcoming budget, otherwise our students, our athletic students, under your charge, will be in the dark again.
Further, and equally important, is the reorganization of our Greenwich High School academic schedule. There are various options that could be implemented to make up for the fact that our student athletes this fall have
30
played their
seconds.
sport with no lights, have had to leave school early, miss classes, and face unsafe conditions. The framework of our school day needs to be more flexible and changed to accommodate the 27 to 28% of our student body that call themselves student athletes. These students should not be at practice any later than 2:45 p.m. The decisions you have to make tonight are elementary. They're at the core of what you, as the Board of Education, are mandated to do on behalf of the student athletes in the town of Greenwich. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Dana Bossi.
Good evening, board, and especially new members. My name is Dana Bossi. I have a sophomore daughter at GHS and have had 2 students go through the Greenwich school system from K through 12. My wife is a teacher at GHS. This morning, Mary Ann shared with me and a few other parents a letter that she wrote on behalf of the Greenwich Parents for Student Athletes, encouraging that the board plan and fund proper facilities and accommodations for our student athletes starting in September of 2018. I am among the overwhelming number of parents who spoke out to encourage the shift to a later start time, and many of us are supportive of the spirit of Mary Ann's request for making certain accommodations for athletes, provided that they can be made consistent with the interest of all students in preserving the hard-won and crucial accomplishment of the 8:30 start time. We support Mary Ann's request for consideration of a new training facility and use of temporary bubbles on current fields. Mary Ann also encourages the reimagining of the GHS schedule and asks that this be done in a way that allows athletic practices to start no earlier than 2:15, as she just reiterated. Here I must say that many of us regard the idea of a 2:45 practice start time for all sports as too prescriptive. It's not necessary for most sports in most seasons. Most winter sports are inside, and spring sports benefit from longer days. We do, however, support exploration of scheduling flexibility for athletes, especially for fall sports. GHS could, for example, mimic other school districts that have the same 8:30 start time as GHS, but use a fixed schedule rather than a rotating block system, and then give flexibility so that athletes can schedule their open blocks at the end of the day or arrange that they get PE credit for practice in that block. Such changes could effectively allow student athletes early dismissal from their open every day during the sports season. We should look at such creative alternatives, especially those now proven to work in many other districts. But any backsliding on the enormous accomplishment of the 8:30 a.m. start time would be a non-starter. The idea of a move to 8 a.m., which might seem expedient, would be irresponsible and would be fought aggressively by hundreds of GHS families if even floated. No sleep expert thinks 8 a.m. is good enough, nor should the BOE. If we are to talk again about moving start times at all, it should be about moving middle school starts from 8 a.m. to 8:30. Let's be clear, the later start time has been a major success. Students are finally getting the sleep that they need. My wife, who teaches at GHS, reports happier, better rested, more alert students. They are no longer chronically sleep deprived, and this means that right now, every day in our high school district, we are seeing tangible benefits to learning ability, learning consolidation, and long-term brain health and development. We have reduced drowsy driving and the potential loss of life from avoided accidents. We have cut suicide risks due to reducing the suicidal ideation known to result from chronic sleep deprivation. The fact that there have been some challenges with buses and practice schedules in certain sports, especially during the few weeks after the loss of daylight savings, should not detract from this big headline that literally all of our high school students and the wider community who lives and drives with them are now benefiting from this later start time. And for those new to the board, perhaps it's worth reviewing that we had round after round of extensive public comment and deliberation of the start time issue last year and for the year prior, in which the tally of remarks were overwhelmingly in favor of following the medical science and moving to 8:30 a.m.
Thank you.
We noted back then that districts that moved to a later start time found that athletic participation.
That's it for the speakers that have signed up. Is there anybody else that would like to address the board? All right, with that, we're going to close the public comments, the public hearing, and move on to our budget reports. First up is the proposed capital improvement plan. Ms. O'Donnell.
Good evening. While we're waiting for the presentation to come up on the screen, I just wanted to quickly introduce some colleagues that were instrumental in helping us pull together the FY19 capital budget that we're presenting to you this evening. First is Dan Watson, back there. Joined us early October, but has gotten up to speed really quickly and joins us from a private school in the city, but having experience working on large projects like Lincoln Center. And I also wanted to just quickly introduce and welcome back Russ Davidson from KG&D. They are the architects that we hire to help us develop our 15-year facilities master plan. And Russ is here as well. This is a bit small. Okay. There are some principles to follow when we're putting together a capital budget, in addition to the multiple layers of processes with respect to developing the town's capital budget, of which the Board of Ed is a part of. So this is a list of items that we considered as we develop the budget, and as we move through the process. Obviously, the first step for us is really identifying what is a capital project or expenditure, as it differs from what we put through on our operating budget. And so we're generally looking for items that have a useful life of greater than a year, or an item that extends the life of the asset. There are a number of priorities and considerations that we thought about as we put together the plan. These happen to be the priorities that we felt were highest for us, but it's also part of the process that we go through as we moved through the town's capital improvement process as the next step in this process. And of course, then we also have several guidelines that are presented to us to consider as we develop the capital budget. And those include the Board of Education's guidelines, the Board of Estimate and Taxation's guidelines, the town's capital improvement program guidelines. And so we had to try to find a way to align those guidelines with one another. And so what is included in your packet is a 15-year plan. We've been asked to summarize all the outstanding capital projects, or the open capital projects, which we've done, and that's also in your packet. I think it's roughly about $46 million in total that's open, and I just want to highlight that about $9 million of that is actually related to facilities. And so roughly 85% of that $9 million is actually from this current year. And as you know, we had some transition this year, so we're working towards getting those projects completed. And we'll continue to make progress on closing out some of the older outstanding projects. And that'll be a goal that we'll work on over the next couple of weeks or into the early part of next year. As part of the process, we're also asked to provide the project scope for each project. So these are included on supporting detailed sheets that are included in the packet. We've asked to provide an update on the status of our outstanding state reimbursements, which the amount that's outstanding is estimated to be about $1.2 million. And I say that's estimated because it's really difficult for us to know exactly how much is due to us because of what's eligible and what may be ineligible. So we're estimating that about $1.2 million is outstanding, and we'll continue to work on those projects over the next couple of months. One of the questions we've been asked several times is, are we able to complete all the projects that we're presenting to you as part of this plan within the fiscal year? Obviously, we have constraints of having to work over the summer months. So the projects that we are recommending tonight are projects that are currently in design, or we can easily move into the design process fairly quickly so that we are able to get to the projects in the summer. And then, of course, we also have the continuation of the digital learning environments. So that sort of summarizes the high-level process. Internally, we have our own process to go through. It was really important to both Dan and I to immediately familiarize ourselves with the buildings upon arrival. So while we recognize that there are other priorities, it was important that we actually heard from the principals and the head custodians. So that's something that we did right away, was go out to every school, meet with those that are closest to some of the needs that they've mentioned, and walk the buildings. We listened to the concerns. We explained what our plans are. KG&D as well also did a tour last spring with the principals and staff. And so together, we really had a lot of information to build our FY19 capital plan, which we think is a solid plan at this point. But this is also a plan that is truly attempting to protect our buildings. And often, the best investments are the ones that don't always have the greatest appeal. We want to fix a roof to prevent further damage inside. It's something we have to invest in, otherwise the work inside will, be all for nothing. There's also a note here, just as a reminder, that tonight's presentation is a working document and that we're looking forward to incorporating feedback into the plan. The budget is actually scheduled to be adopted by the board on December 21st. A little background about our buildings, sort of setting the context for the plan. I wanted to talk a little bit about our aging infrastructure and the outdated spaces that we have here. We have 16 district buildings. 88% of our buildings are over 55 years old. It's important to note that our newest building, Glenville, is already 10 years old, so that'll need some maintenance and upkeep. And we have a few that are over 100 years old, including the district's administrative building, Havemeyer, and Old Greenwich. Cos was also originally built over 100 years ago, but all but the envelope was rebuilt about 20 years ago. So again, these buildings all need regular upkeep at this point. These are just some photos to kind of highlight, what are some of the projects we're going to be, we would like to work on this year. And this is just sort of illustrating some of the units that we have in the schools, but some of the projects that you'll see will include updating our HVAC systems throughout. These are a little dark. To the top right there in the back, you have masonry work. It's actually sort of crumbling. And in the lower section there, you have scaling, forming from slow water leakage on our equipment. These are just some examples of some issues that we're dealing with. So on the left, you have windows that actually have, streaks through them and sort of cloudiness because of the condensation that's forming in between. The seals aren't right there. And on the right, you have exterior doors that are rusted and need replacement. I heard about this not too long ago, the locker rooms. These are just some pictures from the locker rooms. I think we have an out-of-service bathroom here on the right. And if you could see sort of the floor and the pooling of water on the left-hand side. And just to add to that, the locker rooms had some money allocated for this fiscal year for, I guess, the preliminary work related to this project. It's currently in design. We don't have updated numbers at the moment, so the numbers that you see there for FY19 are based on what was presented last year, but we should have that, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So we hope to be able to, we're thinking that we may need to up that number, and that would be simply for, updating, really more providing a facelift to the locker rooms and providing adequate ventilation. These are some images of the Central Middle School gym floor. I don't know if it's easy to see here, but certainly in person, the cracks are actually filled in. And there are sort of numerous ones. I guess the numerous spots where you're seeing this, there are, the floors are literally splinting and coming apart. So we felt this was a high priority to replace in FY19. Program improvements refers to our student spaces. It includes considering spaces like classrooms, furniture updates, renovations to labs or maker spaces, technology upgrades, exterior work, including playgrounds and fields. So the following slides are going to show you some examples of what we have today. It may be difficult to see from the photo, but these cabinets are actually chipped, not functioning properly. Same thing here, there's certainly outdated spaces. KG&D has provided us with some shots of what the future might look like when we redo our spaces. So this particular slide is showing us some furniture upgrades. In this case, you have mobile chairs, larger open spaces, a flexible arrangement. Certainly, so not for FY19, but as KG&D begins to, or looks to finalize our 15-year master plan, we'll hear more about upgrading our learning commons. So these are just some examples of what those spaces might look like. Again, very open, multi-purpose type spaces. What I wanted to highlight here is that the projects that we're recommending for FY19 reflect, they're balancing the equity of investments between what I call programmatic improvements. So again, those space upgrades that the students are seeing, and then amongst our infrastructure projects. And so this year we're looking at roughly that 50-50 split, but that's also been the case for the past couple of years. So we're continuing to see that we're sort of balancing out our investments between those two categories. So our FY19 capital budget proposal or recommendation is $20,850,500. Again, we have prioritized the safety of our students. We're including ADA compliance, which was in collaboration with KG&D, one of the highest priority needs that we found for FY19. There was a long list of high priority items, so there are some things that are being phased, like the ADA compliance. So then I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through more, go into more detail. We're really looking just to invest money into our aging infrastructures. Again, those projects like roof replacements, windows, upgrading our mechanical systems. Obviously with that blend, that 50-50 blend, continuing to update our program spaces for our students, lighting, furniture, exterior spaces and technology. And then of course we have special programs in there, like advancing the Cardinal Field feasibility study to the next phase of design. I heard some comments about that process, and I want to just mention that for the Cardinal feasibility study, we're really looking to close out that process over the next couple of months. And I guess I'll sort of be taking that on as one of my tasks, but I really do want to plan that out well over the next couple of months to make sure we bring that to proper closeout. And then for FY19, what we will be looking to do is actually not construction, it's just really getting through the next phase of design, and then maybe that regulatory phase. And then the following year, we would look at possibly construction. And then, of course, also initiating the feasibility of turf at the middle schools and construction. This schedule highlights our projects in sort of groupings, starting with design and permitting. This is the funding that we need in order to literally get the design going, get it submitted for permitting as necessary for the following year's project. So even though we're presenting $700,000 in 19, it's really for the projects that will be underway in FY20. And so the same thing, so this year we actually have a budget to advance design for projects related to FY19. We have some asbestos abatement to do throughout the district. Building envelope and structure. I just wanted to highlight what was in these categories here. So building envelope and structure includes, we talked about the roofs, the windows, ADA compliance. So we have that work going on here. Cardinal Stadium design we just talked about. Again, that's only for that design phase and that regulatory phase. Exterior is largely the middle school turfing and lighting. We also have some tank removals that will be included there as well. These are underground tanks that we're no longer using, so we just want to have those removed, and that's part of that category. Furnishings is largely for the high school. There's a need for us to update the furniture in the school. Interior includes categories like our annual painting program, carpet replacement that's needed throughout the district, lighting upgrades. We talked about that gym floor at Central Middle School, any door or hardware replacements that need to be done, and of course the locker room is here as well. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing. This includes air conditioning upgrades, upgrading our building management systems. We have a number of emergency lighting upgrade needs. So this is adding to our emergency lighting system. Water service and distribution upgrades and security upgrades are in this category. Playgrounds is a district-wide fund, and we have about 15 playgrounds, so this fund would allow us to replace a playground a year. We'll continue with the technology and digital learning, which is a combination of our digital learning environment, but also supports improvements in data cabling, Wi-Fi saturation, and network infrastructure. Okay, so this slide highlights some of those projects of significance. It's really just looking to highlight, roughly 80% of the budget here. So this makes up about so the total budget of 21 million, so this is about 80% of that 21 million. The MEP upgrades tend to be pretty expensive upgrades due to design work needed for permitting, licensing contractors, and large-scale projects in large areas to cover. So our key messages here are that we've included in our FY19 capital plan those items that we feel are our highest priority needs. Again, we didn't do that on our own. We had a lot of support from and information that we received not only from KG&D, but also from our principals, our head custodians, our internal ticketing system, our facilities team. So we do believe that even at 21 million, we are doing the projects that we feel really need to be done at this point. It continues to maintain annual programs that we need for items that are just fast changing, like technology, like furniture replacement, like keeping our security systems up to date. We're again maintaining that blend of investment between programmatic improvements and infrastructure. And we selected projects that we know we can do. Again, these are projects that are already in design or can move into design fairly quickly. And again, of course, I know with the state reimbursements process, it's a commitment that we've made to move that process along, because that money will then, of course, turn into there being, cash for the town as needed for additional capital investment. So we're committed to moving that forward as well. Looking ahead, we have this evening, and then we'll have December 12th as well for comments. And then on December 21st, we'll have a vote on the budget. And then, well, this is for 1920, but in the spring, or let's say, February timeframe, KG&D will finalize their 15-year facilities master plan and next generation schools study. And so we'll hear more about that, but that information will kind of set the stage for the next 14 years, and we'll need some time to review that. And the plan is to try to incorporate those recommendations in our FY20 capital plan. So at this time, again, we have worked with KG&D, we've collaborated on that effort, and we do feel that we have a solid FY19 capital plan put together. More to come on that facilities master plan then. This is just a summary of our calendar for the year, taking us through March. I know it goes a little further than that, but these are the next meetings that move us through the BOE process, and then to the town process, and through BET, and then eventually RTM. So, and last but not least, how true is this statement? The road to success is always under construction. I worked in New York City for some time, and even now, if you go and visit and you walk through, you'll see that almost every other city block has some construction project going on, and it's certainly a result of the age of the city and our interest in preserving it. And it's really the same holds true here. There's really always work that needs to be done for us to just simply keep up, as I mentioned earlier. And that's okay, because of course it comes with the true satisfaction of watching our students and staff and parents benefit from the improvements that we make each year. So we hope to bring you another year of wonderful advancements of improvements for our children to enjoy. I'm happy to take questions. I'm just going to go ahead and join my colleagues over in the back of the room. Thank you.
I have a question. Sorry, this is a board meeting, so it's for the board to ask the administration questions. If you want to submit something in writing to us by email, that's fine.
I'd just like to know what the budget was for this year, so I can compare it to the 21 million.
11 million.
Right, that's the question.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Questions from board members? Ms. Dayton?
I'll let her get started. Thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it. I have a question for you on the slide called Projects of Significance. I'd like to know which of these items are at risk of imminent failure if we don't fix them, or health and safety issues. Page 18.
Dan, can you use the mic?
Imminent failure?
Or health and safety.
Kind of a broad stroke, but there's a lot of things that need to be done. I don't want to emphasize one. Check, check. Need new Is this good now? Can you hear me? Hello? Good? As far as imminent failure, there's really nothing on the list that's imminent failure as far as safety goes, health and safety. There's quite a few things. One thing that comes to my mind is the locker room, restroom at the high school. It's in pretty poor shape. I did a tour of it again today, probably my 5th tour with Gus. Showing me some areas that really, really need to be addressed. The size of the shower rooms, it's not what people of my age are used to now. You can do with much less. Cleaning it up is going to be a big help to the school. So I mean, that would be the first thing I would point out.
Yep, go ahead.
1 second. All right.
So I would assume that emergency lighting has to do with health and safety if it's for security. Is it for security? The emergency lighting on page 18?
No, it's actually for exiting the building. There's several of the schools that are either lacking or the equipment is antiquated. And it goes from the inside of the school to the outside. There's a lot of buildings that are very dark at night.
Okay, to me that speaks to security, but I'll just beg to differ on that. Is there any discount to the district of doing all these cooling towers in the same year? I have one for ISD, I have one for Riverside.
It's possible. I know we had some preliminary meetings with the town to see if we could partner with the company that they're using. So that is a possibility as we move to through the next process. I'm sure we'll hear more about that.
Just last question. My question was actually, if we don't do both of them in 1 year, do we lose on the pricing?
Yes.
We do. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Dr. Francis?
So I'm a little confused in terms of the 15-year plan. It sounds like we really don't have the 15-year plan yet, which I understood we wouldn't. But we did get in the board documents, which is not this packet, what looked like sort of an estimate going out. And I just was, first of all, to balance for the next 3 years versus the long term, and secondly, to understand sort of the answer to a question I've asked in the past, which is sort of where do we think we'll need to be once we're getting into sort of more of our routine as opposed to kind of catch up, which is what I feel like we're doing now. And it looks like, you know, certainly there's most years 8 million is going to be reasonable in terms of that year to year. Does that seem like a fair assumption based on this calculation that we would be, I'm not, to me, 8 million, 9 million, I'm talking about not 20. 20 is not what we're expecting every year for the next 20 years.
Okay, so I should have started with this, and I forgot to to provide some updates on that piece. The 15-year plan is still a work in progress. We do have some information with respect to the infrastructure upgrades. We asked for the highest priority items. We had a very short window to develop this capital plan, and our focus was on FY19. So we took all the highest priorities for FY19, and that number was still very high, and we actually had to phase it out over a couple of years. So what you're seeing in the packet is FY19, which has been flushed out. The other 14 years remain as they have in the past, with the exception that we took the highest priority needs that were presented to us for FY19 and we had to phase them out. Otherwise, you'd be looking at a much larger FY19 capital plan. And then, of course, there are some additions that we made. I forgot to mention the bubble. We are being mindful of some of the projects that we need to take on. The bubble is temporarily slated in there for FY20. So there are some things that were modified in the next 3 or 4 years, but the rest of it will largely appear as it has in the past. We did delete one project because it was no longer needed. We made modifications where we could, but our focus was truly on FY19 this year.
So not to be a pain, but are you telling me that the numbers going out 5 to 10 years, I shouldn't even consider them to be even close? Or you're saying that's probably not unreasonable that they're going to be in that range?
I think it's fair to say it's more reasonable that it's going to be higher than what you're seeing there. So if you're seeing the 8 million, that's highly unlikely. Like I said, we already took FY19 down by a lot to get it to 21. So I would expect it to be higher than what you're seeing. We'll know more once the full master plan is presented in February, March timeframe.
Other members want to? Miss Tell. It's going to take me a minute.
Fine. Let's see, am I working this right? First of all, Lori, thank you so much. I know how hard it is to put a plan together like this, and I know you're new, just like me, so like I say, it's always easier to analyze these things and actually build them, so thank you so much, first of all. I'm going to ask probably the elephant question in the room. I guess if you take the $5 million out, it's really a $15 million capital expenditure, CapEx plan, I should say. But can you talk to me about the $5 million? Because obviously that's a big number for, I guess it's Central Middle School, for the turf and the lights. How did you get to that number?
So I just want to start and say that we actually left it, I think, at the district level. We didn't identify a particular middle school. I know there have been some discussions about, which middle school will be the school that will be turfed in the upcoming year. And I heard this from the public comments too. We really need to plan that process out. So we left it at the district level. And so more discussions to be had in the upcoming months. In terms of the estimates?
So the estimate we were working on was based around Central Middle School. That's what we were working with. And it's not just a field, it's the entire area, the entire field. So when you have a field like that, that size, you have to include infrastructure, including drainage, power, lighting. So there's quite a significant increase rather than just putting a turf field in the middle of a grass field. So that's why it's at that number. And it still is a very early number.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
I'm going to ask you more about that. Let me also put this in context, however. I'm going to express a real concern with this capital plan. It has nothing to do with the two of you because you two weren't here. But the capital plan, Jill, now, the dates are now sliding yet again. And candidly, I'm very concerned about approving a capital plan. I heard something new that was a complete shock. The shock that I just heard is we're now talking about incorporating KG&D's master plan work not into this budget, which was always the plan. And now all of a sudden we're hearing it's the basis for the plan next year. I can tell you that was not the original plan. And by the way, we were supposed to see a capital plan in October. I think we all agreed we would wait till November. And the reason we were waiting for November was to align it to the work with KG&D. KG&D's work was supposed to be done in December. I think we, last meeting kind of slipped out to January. Now I'm hearing March. Well, she just said February or March. Okay, my point with it is that I'm very concerned about us going forward. I felt very comfortable going forward, telling the town that the 15-year investment, $800 million of investment was going to be required. We've talked about that. Resetting the town on what the level of investment would need to be in schools, I had no problem with that. We've talked about this in public meetings. We've talked about upping the number. I'm very concerned we're going in now asking to up the number, but we don't have a plan that is the basis behind that. That's a pretty exposed position to be in when we get to the BET and the RTM. So I think we've really got to figure out how to get this plan very tightly connected to whatever work KG&D is. The idea of walking in and saying, well, it'll be connected to KG&D's work in next capital plan, I think is, we really need to rethink that. I'm concerned about getting it approved. With that said, I want to go back to this field plan. The Parks and Rec Department already developed an initial plan for turfing part, not all, of Central Middle School. Can you explain how that, and I know you guys have seen it preliminarily, can you talk to me about how that work that was preliminarily done by Parks and Rec already, planning out for Central Middle School? I realize Western's a whole nother kettle of fish because we're in the middle of a remediation there. Can you talk about how this $5 million is actually connected to that work that's been done and the estimates that they already have?
The amount that was approved in their capital plan, so there being Parks and Rec, was to initiate a feasibility study for, is it TOEFL field, am I saying that correctly, and middle school field. We did have a meeting with them to talk about what the next steps would be. We agreed that we would place it into our budget and that they would use some of the funding for that feasibility study. I don't believe anything has happened as of yet because we're to be a part of that process.
They showed us in your predecessors, because your predecessors had to go and get a copy of the plan from them. They were not forthcoming in providing it, but eventually they got it. They found out that Parks and Rec had already done initial designs and estimates for Central Middle School. It came up in, it was brought up actually in a meeting of the Start Time Committee probably 8-10 months ago. So it already exists, and I know they were initially reluctant to provide it to your predecessors, but I know eventually they saw it. And there was some preliminary design work done and some very rough high-level design work done, and there were some initial estimates done. And I was trying to figure out, and that was for turfing, not lighting. So it was turfing 2 fields at Central. Maybe not the design that we wanted. I was just wondering to the degree that that work that has already been started by another part of town government is fitting into this estimate. You both look like you're like, what the heck is he talking about?
Yeah, we haven't seen it. I mean, we're, as I just mentioned before, we know that we're going to partner with them on the feasibility study.
Okay, I think we need to probably extract that out of their hands quickly. This is this thing of this confusion about who's in charge of which things under the agreement with them to do maintenance for us. But, you know, it's a Board of Ed property, and I think you're right. We need to be making the capital investment proposal, not them. But the faster we can connect these dots and advance this project, personally, I think I heard you right. This is a discussion to do this project when, and not this. This is next year. Is
The
what
turfing is
yeah,
for
is what-
19, it's for this coming summer.
This coming summer. Thank you. I thought I heard you say 20. I misunderstood
That
you.
would have
I
been for the
thank
both.
you. I thank you for that clarification.
All right, we're going to see anybody, Ms. Rabin.
So as part of the ad hoc budget committee, I think that's what we were called. Barbara, you were on that with me. I could attest, Lori and Dan, that the original things that we saw were probably twice as high as what's being presented. So the phasing and the prioritization, you might not see that, but it was definitely there as we were apprised of what they were doing. I'm in favor of doing something at the middle schools, especially Central. Crackling. I'm concerned about the investment in the high school, just sort of given where we're at. I don't mean investment in locker rooms. Totally get the locker rooms, but the investment on the site and the bubble. I think we definitely have to think more about that and press harder on developing some of the other town properties.
Actually, I want to ask something and say something. So in response to Peter, the priorities and the projects of significance on 18, some of those items have been in process for a very long time. The locker room, for instance, many for years. And many were identified by KG&D as priorities. And these things, some of these projects take time. They've taken lead work to the point where we're actually able to execute this summer. So even if we had a list from KG&D, I think we'd probably see overlap. I don't know, Russ, am I getting a head nod? I'm getting a head nod. So I think we'd see that overlap. I guess my question for the team in the back is, if we go through with all of these, will any of these affect future projects we intend to do in 20 and beyond? Would they be better paired with something else? We need to do something first before doing these.
I don't think that anything would be in jeopardy. Obviously, when we go forward with the design, we'd want to make sure things get dovetailed in. For instance, the locker room. If something does go forward with the feasibility that was talked about in addition to the school, we want to make sure that that gets dovetailed in. Any other projects, we would make sure that we don't throw things away that are brand new.
All right, Dr. Francis.
When we got I think it was our first sort of brief discussion about the status of the various schools, as I recall, there was sort of a sense of, some buildings you renovate forever and some buildings, have a lifespan and just need to get rebuilt. And my understanding was, I think Central and New Leb fell into those categories. I can't remember, I think there might have been one other. One of the questions I have looking at the expenditures that we're looking at for Central in the next 4 or 5 years, obviously some of them are going to have to be done in the next couple of years, but is this a building that we should think about redoing as opposed to investing $10 million into it in the next 3 years and then 5 years later thinking about rebuilding it? So I'm just curious about that decision-making process and whether this is what we spend in the next 5 years if you're not going to be rebuilding it, but maybe we would reconsider that if that was sort of the building that we were looking at as our next rebuild.
So, hi, it's Russ Davidson. We've spent probably at least 5 or 6 meetings going through this list, and this is a transition plan. So there are a lot of things in here that do come from our study, but we couldn't ignore a lot of the stuff that was already promised to buildings, much of which we didn't know about until Dan and Lori came on board, frankly. So this is a transition plan. I would say it's probably 2/3 the inertia of your earlier capital planning and 1/3 items identified by our survey. To the specific question about Central Middle School and some of these others, even if you replace them in 5 years, everything that's in these plans now needs to happen to keep those buildings functional for even a short-term period. And that's why by the time this budget goes to BET, you will have a more coordinated long-term view. So I do believe it'll be a very credible presentation. We just frankly needed to stop developing the 15-year plan and work with Dan and Lori to get the best 2018-19 plan that you can, which has been great to have them on board and see Lori take the lead on that.
We're going to walk over to the podium for the next thing.
Yep. All right.
In that, I think I would also find it really useful to get not necessarily the details, although I assume you need to do some level of that to be able to give us the number, but what you're envisioning as our kind of year-to-year number, just so we have a sense of, what we're asking the town in the big picture. How much of this is a bump for 3 years and then where are we heading long-term? I don't, of course, I'd like that number not to be astronomical, but it's not so much that I have a set number in mind. It's more that I think if we're going to the town asking for a lot of money, it'd be nice to have some sense of where that long-term aim is going to be as well.
I get the question. It's a tough one because we believe, as we've said before, that you are behind in taking care of your school buildings. You also fund things in many different ways here in Greenwich. You have your annual capital budget, you have the New Lebanons and the performing arts centers that go a different track. So I think the board's going to have a tough decision once they see the whole plan. Do we do a major capital catch-up project and then get back to the 8 to 10 million a year, which is more achievable? That would be one strategy. Or do you go to the 20 to 30 million a year? But these are going to be tough board decisions about how to finance it and how to get from here to there. But it's going to be more. 8 to 10 isn't enough. And I would just point out that, you know, you saw some of the images there of what's happening with next generation schools. And you're building an excellent new school at New Lebanon. You've done a good job with Glenville and Hamilton Avenue. And if you have some parity issues across the district with age and availability. And basically, no, there's nothing that's going to imminently fail. But there's a lot of things that do affect health, like air conditioning and fresh air, and ADA access, and safety, like emergency lighting.
Mr. Chair? I'll yield to somebody else if somebody else has a, well, okay. I'm back on the sports theme. Cardinal Stadium feasibility of the budget. I saw that placeholder for 200,000. I wasn't sure what the plan was there, and the reason I say that is with Cardinal Stadium, I wasn't really sure how we wind up closing out the feasibility study with this item, because we saw these plans. They were this good, better, best thing that committee came up with. I know there was only 1 or 2 representatives of the Board of Education on that. Most of the members of the board are from RTM, town bodies, other things. Now I guess it comes back to us to talk about, you know, what's reality. I'm in the camp of I don't even know what to do with that project because it's connected to so many other things. And I feel like we haven't had a conversation about that's a great idea to go build a $20-30 million stadium. But in reality, there's open questions. You know, would you ever do that if you couldn't light it? You know, there's all kinds of open switches. I'm wondering when we also see maybe instead of good, better, best, we see super practical, like people being able to go to the bathroom, right? And I'm wondering when we wind up with, and if it needs to find its way into the budget, a more modest plan for Cardinal Stadium. I'm not sure how this gets all connected, and if you guys could share what the plan is. I'm trying to connect the capital plan to how that project winds itself getting wrapped up.
The feasibility study was just that, looking at what our options could be. We're hoping to close out that phase because after the feasibility, you really need to get into the design development, your construction document drawings. You need to move through that process. Of course, you have the town's approval process or the regulatory process. That could certainly be a recommendation of the committee to perhaps go to a more modest option that would involve some additional costs to do a redesign at this point. Again, I recognize that this will take some time to get through, which is why the budget only reflects 200,000 just to move us through the next phase of the documents.
I'm sorry, I wasn't being clear. That's my fault. Is the 200,000 to take one of those 3 concepts and turn it into a more advanced design, or
Yes.
is the 200,000 to also come up with something other than those 3 that might be some other form?
My feeling when we put the $200,000 in there was for the first, just taking a design and moving forward with that on to the design development, documents and the construction documents.
If we were to, I guess I'm going to say this, Russ, there's no contingencies to that. I mean, we could go put this on the shelf for a year, right? While we sorted everything else out.
I would just also point out that options A and B can be implemented in many different phases.
Sure.
So you can do
that's helpful, thank you.
the toilet rooms, or you can just do the home site bleachers. And we have an itemized list of each one of those items already done. And so that's one of the considerations for options A or B, in that they can be implemented in pieces, and C cannot. and is by far.
I don't mean to be
the largest
difficult, Larry. I'm thinking about just how much money to put in this budget for
Well,
that project.
I think in our
so that there's a
discussions
placeholder.
with Dan and Lori was, step one is site plan approval.
Sure, yep.
Even if you're going to build one of those out in phases, you need to get a site plan approval to make sure that you don't undo something later on.
That's right.
And that was a placeholder number for the engineering and architectural work to get a site plan approved for your ultimate configuration of Cardinal Stadium.
Thanks, Russ.
All right. Anybody else with questions? Dr. Francis?
I'm not sure I can find it now, but I think what I had seen was that there was sort of 5 million for the stadium and then 5 million for the bubble, which seems like a lot for a bubble.
Well, the bubble
1
was
to
not
5
in
million.
2018-19. There was a 5 million that was exterior, a portion of which, the largest portion of that was Central Middle School fields. Okay, and that's not based on the town thing, which we heard about tonight. That's based on our initial concept design of turfing the grass fields behind Central, because as you know, they're irregular shape. So it's actually 175,000 square feet of synthetic turf, almost 3 football fields worth of synthetic turf, because you get that much practice area back there. And that's the primary reason it's so costly, is because it is an irregular shape. It's hard to stop one place. And it's 175.
I misunderstood. I thought there was something in there that made it sound like we were thinking about $5 million for the bubble, and that's
Yeah, well,
just the bubble.
it is in a future year.
$5 million is what it would cost to put a bubble in?
2. And we've done those estimates, and I think those numbers are based on things we sent over last week.
Anybody else over here? Mr. Sherrill?
Lori, I'd like to see, I mean, if possible, that's why I'm curious what this plan is. Because I think we need to stay focused on our objective, right? It'd be great to go turf. It'd be great to go turf, at least 2 of the middle schools. That would be wonderful, right? But I'm more focused on kind of the practical, which is we need additional best-in-class practice space for our high school athletes. At a minimum, I think, I'm just spitballing, it means we need at least a field that is turf that is suitable for either football, soccer, or field hockey. And I don't know which of those is the largest space required, but we most certainly need 1. Be better if we had 2. And I was thinking at Central, that's why Russ, the turf, the whole thing, because, the project is big. I'd love to see an estimate of what that would look like. And you may come back and say you can never do the project that way because you never do it in steps. I don't know. And then what it would take to light one of those. When we were looking at, I forget what the numbers are for the poles and new lights and LED. Maybe Gaetan can answer that question. I want to say it was like between $1 million and $1.5 million. For one field.
One field's about 400,000 to 500,000.
Okay, even less. So let's just round it up, say it's $1 million. The question would be, instead of the 5 million option, is there a phased option of something that we could do so that we have that in our back pocket? And by the way, it'd be very difficult to do that. Let's get realistic. It'd be very difficult to do that by the 1st of October. It's doable, but we better make a decision really quick if we're even thinking that. And then the one on the bubbles was, I had heard from the Greenwich Athletic Foundation, and I have no idea where they got these numbers, but it's worth investigating. The question in my mind would be, is bubbles permanent? Or is bubbles a multi-year temporary solution until we can build a long-term strategy? And if that's the case, is it necessary to purchase them to the tune of $5 million? Or is there a way to get them on a temporary basis? I don't know, let's call it $5 million, I'm making it up. $500,000 each year. Is there another alternative here so that we can keep our eye on the prize, which is we need better practice facilities for more teams under the control of the Board of Ed October 1 next year. I don't know how that's possible.
There's a lot of questions in there, so let's go back to Central. So the budget to turf 175,000 square feet, all the fields, and light them is 4.3 million. Okay, the other stuff is other exterior improvements. So obviously you can cut that down to parts, but that's all turf and all lit. So that is not a bad value in my view for that number of fields. The problem with doing in half is that you make fields not functional, because then you have synthetic turf turning to grass in the middle of a baseball outfield because of the way it's configured. So certainly they could all be reconfigured and you could get one rectangular practice field, but then you would be changing your configuration of fields, which does have a domino effect across the district. We did a bunch of research on bubbles, and we actually gave you three ranges, because all those questions are good, of course. And the range was from 5.8 to 4.6 for bubbles that are only used seasonally. In other words, they're not air conditioned. Because if you keep a bubble up all year round and you want to use it in the summer, you have to air condition it. But there's a considerable expense in just leaving them unair-conditioned, or taking them down costs almost as much after 2 years as air conditioning them. We don't know of anybody that rents bubbles, we asked. We did contact 2 air-supported roof structure companies in our research. And really, if you, and there's a question of whether we're going to be able to reuse the synthetic turf that's in place when you put bubbles on it. And I think that's where the option A was selected at 5.8. So that is, basically with air conditioning, new drainage, utilities, concrete walkways, site lighting, bubbles that are lit. And, you see bubbles come up and down, and we've worked with a number of them, but a bubble has a foundation to hold it down. So you really dig up the perimeter of the field. You build a concrete foundation to tie the thing down to. It has significant machinery. We researched the noise that makes, and we heard that it's relatively quiet. They have pretty good sound ratings, and they have emergency power backups, because obviously a bubble has to remain inflated. So there was a bit of research done there. The raw number for a bubble is about $1.1 million, but when you add foundations and everything else that has to go to it, this is what it comes up to. And yes, on short notice, and for something that's going to happen 2 years from now, you don't underestimate.
Yeah, Russ, that's hugely helpful. That connects a lot of dots. Thank you.
Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. Russ Welch, a question to you, Mr. Bernstein. Will we be able to submit a bunch of questions afterwards like we did for the...
Yes, so this will come back up December 12th.
Okay, great. So then I won't ask like a bunch of nitpicky questions, which hopefully you can just respond to in a form. But would you be able to, like you prioritize the operating budget, sort of to Jennifer Dayton's question before, prioritize, and you don't have to do it now, but in the future, obviously, or, for our next meeting, that ones that are health and safety, right? So I look at, for example, I imagine this $1 million at Central Middle School for replacing steel columns at a boiler room. I'm thinking that's probably pretty important, something like that. Versus, I don't know, I'm not going to throw something out there because I don't want to make the wrong assumption, but if you could just prioritize those in the same way, I think of the 15 million sort of taking out the middle school field, or of the 20 million, however you want to do it. Thank you.
Other questions?
I only have one more, if I could. Can you guys help me understand what actually happens in a locker? I didn't pay attention closely enough. A locker room, $1.6 million. I've toured those locker rooms. What is it we're doing for 1.6? I got the part of the 400,000 this current year. I had missed the part of the 1.2. What is it? That's a lot of money for locker room reconfiguration.
So here's the plan in the nutshell. We had an architect who was working on the project who was not being overseen by the facilities department. And he came back with a $7.2 million locker room renovation.
Good Lord.
So that was presented to me during my second week.
The fanciest bathroom ever built.
And I looked, well, it was beautiful. You know,
Spa
it was a
like,
little
I'm
bit
going
more
over
than,
there.
it was really what everybody there wanted, including the phys ed department, all the coaches. You know, it was nice, and it rearranged the entire suite. They brought in Title IX parity, as well as, I mean, right down to inches. Boys, girls, team rooms, coaches' rooms, training rooms, access from the girls' locker room to the pool, ventilation. Actually, ventilation was not included. This was all structure and finishes. So once we took a look at it, and I had not seen the budget for it yet, we reeled the architect in and said, this is a non-starter. So they are in the process right now of designing a locker room to be within budget. So what they come up with, I'm not sure just yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, if there's no other questions, Ms. Eves, maybe you can tell us when the comments would be due for the December 12th meeting. Okay, so the board questions would be due for the next round of the budget for December 4th. And you send those to Dr. Gilday. And it's capital and operating.
Is there going to be another Google Doc form thing, or do we just?
Great. All right, I think that's it on capital. Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is the 2018-2019 budget Q&A round one. So Dr. Gilday, you're up.
Great, so the questions that were submitted were answered, and you should have received that. So if you need any clarification, please let me know.
Misty.
So I had asked the question about whether the budget contained funding for rental fields. Are we thinking we don't need to do that because we've just gone through the capital plan talking about turfing fields? Are we thinking that we don't need to consider off-site fields, out-of-town fields?
I'm looking to my team over here to see who answered that question for us. But yes, I believe that that was the thought, that it would be an offset or replacement.
All right. Anybody else have questions? Dr. Francis.
I think it would be helpful for me to kind of get an overall sense of the SST picture. I understand that there are things that we don't have budgeted that we probably should. There's things that we seem to be planning for within capital. I mean, you know, what I'm not clear on, for example, is it seemed like we were having some trouble early this year with, for example, the transportation for athletics, but I think part of that was just that our bus company was having trouble. So how much of that is going to be fixed just because hopefully it'll be another year and things will be running more smoothly, and how much of it is that we need to really be thinking about the funding perspective and what we need to add in? Can you kind of give me a rundown on some of that?
Those are great questions, and that's why we're doing all the research we're doing this year, to try to find the right answers for that and not just give you a blanket guess. So I think you could see in some of the responses the numbers that we have legitimately charged, which are the new buses. But I think the things that we'll follow up with are things like, you know, the overtime that we've been paying for people to stay for those in between supervisions, which again may be a one-year thing, so you wouldn't budget that. Some of the rentals if we end up not needing that, but we should know what the athletic runs have cost this year. So you should see what that impact of that is, but we did not budget something like a project manager or anything like that for SST in particular.
And to be clear, right now, we are using 3 additional buses, but we don't have that budgeted for next year.
That will clarify with Lori. I think we budgeted, did we budget 3 additional for next year as well? Did we roll them for the same number, or did we back them out?
So we intended to back it out, but somehow the number still resulted in us erroneously including 3 additional buses anyway. So that funding then would be available for emergency services.
All right, I'm still confused. I'm sorry to be slow. So it seemed to me that we decided we needed 3 additional buses this year. I thought we were going to still need those for next year, but that somehow we hadn't put it in the budget. Now I'm hearing it is in the budget, but that we may use it for something else, but...
No, we don't want to use it for something else. What we did was we intended to show it as a program and service item just for your consideration. And not have it in both places. We didn't want to both in the operating budget and on the program and service schedule. Our intent was to remove it. But as we went back and reviewed the calculations in the question, we realized that it was basically double counted.
So we've got it.
I'm going to ask a question. I had asked about community connections, and I realize it's probably been a long time since we've had any kind of program update on that. So I'm hoping for more details, and Mary, I can put this in writing. But I'm going to ask whether we've benchmarked against other districts for this type of program, whether we know what our population for that program looks like next year. Really, I think just a lack of clarity on my part into what is encompassed in that program. And I realize it's not broken out like the alternative high school, so maybe that would help a little bit. But I'll ask in writing again. Ms. Rabin?
I think there were a lot of questions about the admin support in the Havemeyer building, and there were answers to it that the town would rather us have multiple part-time people that we don't pay benefits to as opposed to a full-time person that we do pay benefits to. But I think there's this perception that I keep hearing about, I'm just going to be crude, we use this at work, butts and seats. So there's electricity, there's desks, there's all the supplies of having, more people. So is it truly more cost effective or more efficient? I know there's the benefit part to have multiple part-time people as opposed to more full-time people. You don't have to answer the question now, but I think I saw it a lot in the questions, and maybe just a stronger kind of apples to apples response there would be appreciated.
Ms. O'Neill?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about a response in the book about the school psychologist being added through Evolve. I thought I understood Evolve to be a system where a principal could decide to trade 3 paras for a teacher depending upon the needs of the students in that building. So I was trying to understand how this Evolve was working. Were we taking 3 paras which worked directly with students for a psychologist, and in what building was that happening? And also I believe I read that it was happening that we were replacing paras for speech and language service person. So I always thought it was a trade for paras, for teachers who work directly with students. So I would like some kind of explanation to clarify that.
I can just give you a quick clarification, but I can elaborate for you. The school decides how they want to look at direct services to students. The whole premise of Evolve is that the students with more significant disabilities or students with special education needs are spending more time with paraprofessionals than they were with teachers. So the school looks at their student population, they look at the needs of those students, and then they decide if they want to increase their certified staff while decreasing their non-certified or classified staff. So this year, I believe, 2 schools evolved for additional psychology support because they were experiencing more students with behavior problems. So rather than attaching paraprofessionals to be reactive to the behavior problems, their thought was to increase their psychological supports to get in front of those behaviors and look at behavior plans. Similarly, at one of the schools, they looked at the amount of speech services and wanted to have the speech therapist work proactively with the gen ed teachers to decrease the reliance on the paraprofessionals to carry those out in a generalization way, but to have actually the speech therapist spending more time with the students. So it doesn't have to be teachers only. It's looking at the provision of services by certified staff versus classified or non-certified staff for students with disabilities.
And just a follow-up question, and when do principals make that decision? What time of year?
May.
So they make the decision in May for their staffing in the coming year?
Yes. They have to wait till we assign their staffing to them. They look at the staffing that they get from central office based on the roster in May, which clearly changes some. But we require that they make that decision by May 31st, so we're not excessing or adding staff at the beginning of the school year, if at all possible.
Mr. Chair?
I was going to make a similar comment about Evolve, but I think we need to be very careful on the board this year with the budget. We now have a new superintendent. We're asking her essentially to run the program. I don't think we, in this round, and I hope my board members will agree, we probably should not be micromanaging, as an example, in Evolve, what's trading for what. There's a total salary account. It's a certain number. Jill's got to figure out which people are going to be in there, and as long as she doesn't overrun that number, I think we should give her the latitude to decide how many staff they are and of what type they are. I think to Ms. Rabin's point, however, we do need to be mindful that we're not doing head count that is adding necessarily to the costs in line items that are off our budget, like healthcare. So as an example, I know originally when this was presented, there was a discussion about adding up to 10 head count. It may not necessarily overrun our budget, but it drops a number off into the town budget in terms of benefit packages. So I'm sure you're mindful of that, but I think we should be very careful about micromanaging which type of role for which type of trades Jill is essentially recommending. With that in mind, Jill, I was a little puzzled, and I was hoping you could clarify, because in the last meeting we heard from a bunch of people at the high school who were concerned about this Evolve trading for I guess they're assistant deans. I want to call them assistant principals, but they're really assistant deans. Because that was done through Evolve this year. And unfortunately, our head of HR was kind enough to explain to me that there's this Evolve reset. I was hoping you could explain it in terms that were clear, because I think you're recommending that in this budget, and this is a question, because I heard something different from the administrators, you're recommending this budget retaining those positions, or you're recommending eliminating those, because I couldn't figure that out, and I was a little confused.
So none of the items on this are incorporated into the budget.
Right.
And that they're listed here. So any of the
But this year they're funded because they were evolved.
Correct.
So why wouldn't we do that again?
Evolve resets.
Well, okay, but it doesn't need to reset, right? You could make the decision that said, because we took, let's just, I want to go through this just so I'm clear. This year we took 3 paraprofessionals, or some ratio, 3 or 4 paraprofessionals, and they were traded in terms of head count to provide the funding for these assistant deans this year. My question would be, going into next year, if that's our actual, and it's all rolling up in terms of salary, not cutting and splicing everything, why wouldn't we just keep doing that next year and have it be the actual head count that we have this year? Why does it all, because it says, if we're doing this, then, quote, resetting, we're adding all those paraprofessionals back in, and then we have a hole for these assistant deans. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, just, if I can just say, The reason we reset Evolve is because it's based on the needs of the kids. So this year, when we looked at the needs of the kids at the high school and across the district, we were able to do that to see if this would work to increase the amount of time the House administrators could spend in classrooms.
You traded it.
And we traded it in.
Right.
But I don't know that we're going to be in a position to do that this year. So we'd have to start from the beginning, look at what our needs are through IEPs for actual direct service from students, and then see if we have the positions.
But Mary, my point is the needs at the high school that they're supporting didn't disappear. So what they're really saying is you made a strategy decision, which makes sense, that these people were traded. Okay, fine, that's the decision of the administration. But it doesn't, I don't know how all of a sudden we need to put all those people back. So I'm interested in the total head count, not how you trade them. I don't think that should be our business. But I didn't understand how all of a sudden we have to put all those heads back. That's what you're saying when you say a reset. We have to go put all those heads back in the system. And it means everything we traded and we reset, it means we're now putting all those heads traded back into the budget. And that I'm having struggle trying to understand that because that's increasing total head count.
No, the number of paraprofessionals is set. That has been set since about 20 years. So I start with that number as my end. I look at where the kids' needs are. We use the ratio and allocate out the paraprofessionals. At this year, when we did that, there were paraprofessional positions not allocated directly to schools based on the ratio, and we were able to evolve. I don't know that I'll be able to do that next year. In point of fact, we had some kids move in that we weren't expecting, and that's both the benefit and the downside of Evolve is you're making that decision prior to September 1.
All right, we're going to move on. Ms. Dayton?
So I would like to ask board members their thoughts on increasing the budget to incorporate items that aren't in the plan so far. I feel very strongly that if there aren't funds to enable us to move to the CABE policy system, we are not governing the district properly. I note that on page 16, the last item under board budget, they're not integrated.
I thought we had 12,000 in for that somewhere. Am I remembering that incorrectly?
It says we have 12,000 in the program services proposal of items that weren't in the budget. So I'm asking for us to strongly consider having a rational basis for updating our policies, keeping track of new legislation. I think that should be in the budget. We can discuss that, or I can move on to the next. What's your pleasure?
If you give me a moment, I think actually it was in the proposed budget, so I think it may be a duplicate, but maybe Lori can look at that for the next meeting. But I thought we had money for CABE allocated within the budget itself. No? Okay, worth discussing.
The really good news is with that bus shift, you've got some room of things you can add.
Okay, so
I think
on
there's
that
probably some
note,
interest in moving that in.
interested in moving that in. I'm also very interested in, once again, trying to leap forward in career readiness by establishing one new career pathway in the area of information systems. There's no cost information in the current document that I'm looking at, the budget questions and answers, but I am very interested in knowing what it would take to provide an early college program in information technology that would allow us to use Norwalk Community College for advanced courses and 6 to 8 weeks of job training for people who really do need to pursue advanced skills for the workforce, perhaps a 2-year college, but not necessarily the 4-year college experience. When we went through the graduation requirements review, it was very clear to me that we're not serving a percentage of our high school population that could benefit not to mention the state of Connecticut that could benefit from workforce improvements. So what are your thoughts?
I always love innovating rather than cutting. Always pick research and innovation and implementation of great programs for students. So I know this is something that has been near and dear to Irene Parisi's heart as well, and looking forward to having the more extended conversation over CTE as a whole, and reimagining or designing that to be a future-focused center at the high school for our students. So I know that that's a conversation still to be had. And we hope sooner rather than later.
I'm reluctant to let it go another year because we had a report in the spring, we had another report in the fall, we had ample discussion at the board level. We are not serving a percentage of our population that could truly benefit from this. It is not only important for our graduates, it fits in with the whole state strategy to start bringing coding in K-12 to try to ready the workforce for new jobs of the future that haven't been invented yet. So I'm going to continue to urge you to put it in the budget, even if it's just a pilot program, even if it's just a few students at not great expense for the board to then reevaluate a bigger investment.
I'm wondering if this is something that we build in as part of our Innovation Lab strategy, or if this is a different pathway with elective offerings. Or do you imagine it in either way?
I imagine it very differently from Innovation Lab, only because I have a son in Innovation Lab, and it is very different from what I'm talking about. I'm talking about real workforce training, not conceptual academic work, project-based learning. I'm talking about real job training and advanced skills.
Ms. Raven.
I have two things because I didn't want to finish out on the Evolve, sorry. And then I'll comment on Jennifer's proposal. So for the Evolve piece, the evolution, I don't know what you call it, the flipping, the swapping, or whatever, swapping, trading, sorry, to the psychologist and speech person. What happens when they're not needed at that particular school? Because I was concerned when the assistant dean spoke to us at the last meeting that some of them took the position not knowing it was temporary. So it just seems odd that somebody in that type of role is potentially swapped out. So it's concerning to me. So I guess just a little bit more clarity on that. And then for Jennifer, I'm supportive of that. I was trying to look for the line item because I can't remember now what it's called, but it was the person who would help with the public-private partnerships. So I think that dovetails in what you're talking about, because there are other agencies in town that are trying to do job skills training for adults. So there may be ways to leverage some of the other agencies and the work that they're doing. So the person that was in the budget, that's not in the budget, the person that was in the extras, might be connected to that, and I would support some sort of connection there.
So I would like to support the money for the science research program. That's an outstanding program that brings much recognition to the district. It's not sufficiently funded now, and it should be, because that's a program that should be able to grow without the constraint of money. And so I would encourage you to look somewhere, professional development, whatever, to find the funds to really begin, and that's only beginning, that 10,000, to begin to fund that program appropriately. Actually, that number should probably be 25,000, but I think anything would be a beginning, and it would be send a signal that the board thinks that that program is important.
I think a lot of us thought about sort of the programs and services and what we want to do here, and I'm wondering if maybe we're sort of jumping around from one to the other. Is there a way we might want to organize ourselves to have a discussion about each one and not sort of jump from one to another, so that everybody gets a chance to kind of finish out one and then sort of move on to another? Just because I kind of feel like I have a comment about one that we talked about 2 ago, and then one we talked about 1 ago, and then I'm like, oh, I'll drop that one because now we've moved on to something else, but it might be nice if we could kind of find a way to go through them.
We've got 2 people who had their hands up. I don't know if they object if we work through the list or.
No, I was going to add a new one, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, are you okay?
All right, no, I agree with Dr. Francis. It's a little weird jumping around, but I have a totally different view, and Jennifer, I'm with you. I'm with everybody else, but I think we're going about it the wrong way. We need to advance STEM education across the district. And what we need to hear from the superintendent is how much money needs to be spent to dramatically up our game in STEM. Then if we're upping our game in STEM, that means more coding, more classes, more science research, more all these things. I think what we need to be doing at the board level is figuring out what's the level of investment we're making in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Because if you look through this list, there's science research, there's $750,000 for a new coding thing. By the way, newsflash folks, we're already doing coding. If you had a kid who was in elementary school and middle school, they're doing coding. There's not this idea that we're not doing coding. But I think we need to fit this in, and the role for the board should be, is this the right level of investment? Candidly, I want more investment in STEM. I'm very concerned, we're patting ourselves on the back about our mathematics achievement when we looked at it in the achievement report. Newsflash, we got 1/3 of our kids across the district who are below proficiency. We're not even close to where we are in the LA. So Jill, what I'd rather hear from you is, and from Irene, is do we need to spend more money on STEM? And if we needed to spend more money on STEM, what would be the priorities? Would it be this high school thing that Jennifer's talking about? Candidly, I would not want to, if I could spend $50,000 that impacts 20 kids versus $50,000 that impacts 100 kids, I'm going to pick the 100 kids all day long. I think we need to start, though, with a recommendation from you, and I don't know if we should be extracting that out of this list in a category, as Dr. Francis was suggesting, so we can take one at a time, or how we should proceed. I hope we would focus on STEM, the big picture, and the level of investment.
So I think partly when we looked at the budget and the budget development and the guidelines and trying to match the guidelines, I think you can say that those guidelines equal current state, right? So if we're okay with current state, that's what we're doing. I think any of the things on this list, while we tried to help prioritize it, while we understand there are limits, I actually appreciated the way Jennifer started. Her request is, let's look at it all, because in a percentage base, you're not looking at very much, to be honest, on the scheme of everything that we spend in the whole district over the course of a year. You're looking at, if you did everything on this list, it's not even 3 million, right? 2.6, it's another 2%. So the ask is, what is the board's tolerance in going at or above the level of the budget guidelines, which I realize is different than you normally do. I realize usually, we bake these in differently, but we set it out this way specifically so that you could see, yes, we can maintain level service with the guidelines, but we're not growing, we're not innovating, other than what we can do as a system, and that we do. We try to do great PD, we keep people learning and growing, we keep people innovating and trying new things as much as we can within the constraint. These are the things that are the adds, right? So these are the value adds. So if you believe that we need to be innovating and doing something more, these were the things on the list. This was not a let's dream big, everybody, and redesign everything. These were things that have been on your list as things that are needed or things that we think will move the needle, which is why they're here. So while I agree we are definitely doing things with coding, it is not systematized K-12. It is not something that's coached into every classroom right now across content areas right now. I think we're in the infancy steps of it, but I don't think we're advanced in it at this point, and I think we could be. But it takes an investment, and it takes time, and it takes prioritization, just like any of these innovations would. So I agree with you, the big picture design is the more exciting part of it. But probably the first question is there a tolerance in the board team to go above the guidelines and take that chance that then you're going to have RTM cutting things at the end, or BET cutting things, or maybe not.
The question in my mind isn't whether you go over, it's whether what we're doing satisfies the needs of the district in terms of student growth and advancing achievement. I think that's it. I'm not set on a specific number or percentage. If these are things that the board decides are required, then those are things that I think we would move forward with, and we'd have to stand up and defend those. So, but I'm happy to go through this one by one if that's what people want to do.
Very quickly. Looking at the executive summary, it's a 2.19% increase over the current year's budget. We have room within the guidelines. I don't know why we're having this discussion, honestly. If you look at the BET guidelines, there's no need to have this discussion.
All right, so why don't we start with the first item on page one of the ad sheet, which is the long one. So item one, it's leadership, professional development, training, mentoring, and support, other than focused with a PH, which is really fat. Are there any other comments or thoughts on that item? Okay, moving on. Number two, coaching for professional leadership. And I don't know if everybody's noticed, there's an A and a B priority. A is associated with things that are looked at for 2019, and then B is beyond. Anybody on number two?
I just want a clarification about the coaching for professional leadership and leadership professional development. Is one focused on teachers and one on administrators, or?
Correct.
So the first one with Todd White is for teachers, and that would be in addition to what we're already spending on professional development for teachers?
That would be continuing our services with that particular support, who has been in the district for the past couple of years.
And why then now, is this additional money we're adding, or is this, can he not be continued as part of a level services?
Because he's a consultant.
So the money we spent on him in the past is now being used for something else?
Go ahead, Irene can probably answer this.
We're asking to increase his services because of the work that he's been doing in partnership with us with the strategic plan and personalized learning. So we are reducing in other areas, but because this is in addition to, this is why it's on this particular document, we already contract with him a small amount. So again, given the work that he's been doing and the change in teacher practice, we're asking for the increase in his contract.
Okay.
All right, so if there's nothing on number two, we'll go to number three, which is the family and community engagement specialist. Ms. Rabin.
Was that the one that was, so you know what, where I'm getting confused, Jill? When you give us the briefing for the meetings, and you've presented this probably 2 meetings ago, it might have been in your overview. So was this the place where that coordinator for private-public partnerships was? And I'm digging number 3.
Right, so this is a part-time position that would kind of bring to life that FACE section. 20% of your board strategic plan is actually focused on FACE without anybody specifically having the assignments other than communications and SEL work through student support, pupil personnel. So this would actually give that strategic initiative legs, literally.
Any
You
other
have to have a little
comments on this
lightness, right? A little.
one? All right, nothing else on 3. We'll go to 4, which is the Code to the Future Partnership Program.
Right, and that is a strategic short-term coaching model that actually is brought in as a partnership, works with teachers so that they understand in what ways coding can be incorporated across content areas. It does require not only the actual person that would join with us, almost like a consultant to do this, but it also includes all of the coding. You have to make sure you have certain applications, certain software available, so that includes both the coaching as well as the materials or supplies they would use. So if we already had Scratch Junior, which I believe we do, in other words, we wouldn't have to repurchase that, but that.
Just a quick question on that. Do we offer any professional development on coding right now?
Yes, it's part of our program of studies.
Not a program for
For
PD.
the adults, for the adult learners.
When you say program of studies, I think
We
about
have
the
one
high
too
school
for the adult
students.
learners.
Ms. Stowe?
So it's not an additional headcount, it's just a consultant plus the program? Correct, it's, right, the model is set up that basically they come in, they support and help, they model, a typical coaching model, and then when they're not needed, they move away. So it's usually a short-term commitment. But
Mr. Sheriff?
Jill, I would support spending more money on STEM. I think I said that, particularly in the area of software and application development, which is what this is teaching kids the basics of application development. However, I would want to spend money on something that leads more quickly to direct instruction, not a two-step, which is, let me train you, do some internal development. Well, right, but I think what you just said is train teachers to incorporate it into existing other curriculum. That's a little bit indirect to actually teaching kids to code. So
they do this right within the classroom, side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the teacher, and model and demonstrate it with applications that teachers have gotten used.
I'm interested in something that I would support investment that has direct impact in the classroom. I would be less supportive of spending above budget for things that are, I guess, teaching 900 teachers to fish.
No, this is something that is directly shoulder to shoulder with teachers, and you see impact within 6 weeks. Within 6 weeks, you have kids talking about debugging problems, because that's what they've learned in their coding class.
Okay. Did you use it somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay.
To actually be accepted into this organization, we would have to go through an application process, so it's not a typical vendor.
Dr. Francis?
So is the 750 sort of an estimate, like a certain percentage you're paying for sure because you're paying for the manpower, and then the rest is dependent on what you need? Because, I mean, there's more, not only do we have stuff, but there's more and more stuff out there that's for free. So I would hope that it's it sounds like it's not from what you just commented on, but that it's not something where we're buying a whole package and there may be stuff there that we don't need.
Correct.
Code Academy, Khan Academy, I mean, there's Scratch, there's so many things you can actually get for free that I would hope we wouldn't be forced to buy stuff we didn't need. Now, last time we talked about this, you were saying you didn't think this would be something you would want for next year, for the year after, or is that just a money issue?
It was a money issue.
So you'd be ready for next year if we gave you the money?
I think so. I mean, it's definitely something like anything. You want to talk with principals and teachers and make sure there's an interest in doing this across the district. But I think when you're looking for consistent, explicit, you're looking for results, you're looking for those things that help support personalized learning, these are all the things, that do that. But it is a shift. It would be something, but again, it provides the support for the teachers. It's not saying go to it. It's saying, here you go. This is how we get you there. So it's a nice supportive system.
All right, moving on, we're on page 2 at the top, number 5, the PE Wellness Coordinator. Any takers?
This one's been on the list for a few years.
I think we're pretty familiar. All right, moving on, number 6, the ESL Avid Coordinator.
This is interesting. The classroom ratios that we use for our K-5 classrooms does not have a parallel formula for our EL learners. So it's something I think we need to visit as a district, and it's something that, you know, depending on the numbers of students that we're serving, it's really, our person does a wonderful job, but it's kind of an unwieldy job if you think about, she's trying to teach, oversee EL program for the entire district, and oversee AVID. In most districts, AVID would be one position, EL would be one position. It's typically not combined with teaching as well, especially with the numbers we have.
Dr. Francis.
I'm sorry, just explain again, you said that we typically have a calculation and we don't have it for EL. Can you say that again, because I didn't understand that?
Correct. So we have a classroom guidelines, class size guidelines that we use that are common for K-5 classrooms, and even 6-8, you have an allocation of billeting formula. You don't have that parallel with EL.
And that's not to calculate your administrators?
Your, right, your staffing.
You're just saying if you
staffing
had an
model.
administrator in charge, they would be doing that sort of thing?
Well, they would be doing a lot of things. There's a grant associated, so there's grants management, there is assessment management, there is a lot that goes into an EL program in and of itself, much less AVID. But again, it's just another example of where we are not funded or we're not staffed similarly to a district of 9,000 students. I would expect in a district of 9,000 students that does have a diverse base that you are going to have an EL coordinator, that you're not going to ask a teacher to do this part-time. I think that was okay when you had maybe 100 kids that were EL district-wide, but you've got 15 sites. You know, it's kind of an unrealistic staffing model right now, or unrealistic admin model, and we have to look at staffing in addition.
Ms. Deaton.
I would be supportive of the change from 0.5 to 1 FTE only if you take what's on page 1, family and community engagement specialist, and combine it with the ELL and AVID role. That's the only way, to me, that we can justify making that administrator.
Mr. Scher.
I'm going to talk about this one. I'm going to back up. My feedback to you, Jill, is the problem with this conversation is it's stuck, and you've talked about this before. It assumes there's no reorganization of our organizational model. It's all we use this language, level services, do what we're doing now, siloed departments, people, and it results in this drip, drip, drip of add this, add that. I'd rather get on with empowering you to essentially tear up that organization chart and take headcount and use it in a more innovative way. I was really impressed, as an example, in the conversation with the people at Stevenson High School, which was, top high school in the country 2 years in a row. And what they did, you had, as an example, an athletic department, and you had a PE department. Here in Greenwich, those are like, the twain shall never meet, and there's tension because PE has a curriculum to it. It's different than what's in athletics. But what they did there is they figured out how to collaborate, work together, and they've come up with new, more innovative offerings for kids, particularly student athletes, as an example, by getting the departments to kind of work more effectively together. Now, I'm not saying that means I don't know what that means when we say more or less people, but it seems to me there's probably a lot of synergy opportunities if you could be completely unleashed to essentially organize as you see best. And maybe it isn't how it is now, but I don't know to the degree to which that's baked in here, and I'm wondering if a lot of the things we want to do could happen by giving you just all these trade-offs instead of us micromanaging each one?
Well, I think, interestingly, that's a 4,300 student, one campus.
Much bigger than we are.
High school.
Yeah.
Staffed pretty parallel to what we are at 9,000 K-12. So that's a really interesting comparison to make, because I think if I were staffed like that one site high school district, I think, we'd be having a different conversation. So I think you're right, it's a great place, but it's staff rich, right? So
my problem is more the synergy and collaboration part instead of sub-optimizing. I'm wondering to what degree we get in the way of you being able to do that.
Well, I think part of this model was to try to be, especially in our first couple of months here, right? There are 5 of us in the district office team that are, 2 years or less in the district. So we have to, I think, remember that. So in my first couple of months, I think there's nothing that makes teachers happier than saying, new superintendent's coming in and it's going to change everything, right? I think that would be a little stressful for everybody. So I think some of it is you have to learn the system and the context before you're talking about, having a true understanding before you are upending something and getting that feedback, because I would imagine that your educators and your administrators have just as many valuable ideas, even in looking at this list. And remember, this was not a let's dream big, what's everything you want in the world kind of list, right? Like, this to me is really minimal, to be honest, not stretching as far as I wish we would stretch. But again, it's my first couple of months, and I think people are very sensitive and understanding, just like the strategic, the visioning of the 15-year plan. We did debate that as an administrative team quite a bit as to whether we were going to try to push ahead and have everything done and be able to prepare that for BET, or if we were going to be really reasonable and spend a good amount of time having great understanding of what we need next year, and then take the time to educate properly and plan properly so that everybody will have a better understanding going into next year. And BET nodded their head rapidly when we talked about this in front of them, that yes, they would rather we come to them a year later with a really solid 15-year plan that people have been educated on, rather than just throwing something at them. So that was why we made that decision. So I think that's important to note. But similarly with staffing, yes, I think we can always, again, innovate. But when I'm watching even just district team, the jobs are designed right now to be 80-hour-a-week jobs, and you've got really great people who are doing the 80 hours a week all the time, every day. But I don't know in a sustainable way that we can expect that of every one of these people. I think you've noted turnover. I think you've noted, all kinds of things, happening in the district. So as you note that, I think we have to look at it, are the jobs doable? So while I appreciate the suggestion about combining FACE and EL, I would just be creating another unwieldy position that nobody's going to be able to fully realize the potential of that. A better match would be our community liaison with family and community engagement coordinator. That would be a better match. It would make more sense to do. So yes, all of those things, that's the exciting part of a new job, right? Is to take the time to learn and do all this. But I think in my transition plan also, I've asked for time specifically to learn, reflect, and assess. Because I'm hoping to do that for longevity purposes. Because I think if I just start throwing things at all of you, it's not going to go well. I think our community here takes some time, wants some time to process those things, and we are trying to be sensitive to that across the district while we're dealing with some pretty rapid shifts, right? Start time was a really big change, not because of the hour in time, but because of all the logistics. So I don't want to unnecessarily cause another logistics hurdle before I really understand the way things are working, because we truly want to make it better.
All right, if there's nothing else on the ESL AVID coordinator, we'll move to number 7, which is the assistant deans. I know several people have commented on this. I just want to add my comments. I'm a little troubled by the fact that you have people who took these jobs giving up other positions, not knowing it was a pilot. Honestly, until we saw it on this sheet, I had asked a question in October about it. That was the first we had heard of this as a staffing pilot. I just think that's pretty bad practice. Going forward, I hope we can find a way within our budget now to fund these positions if we deem them absolutely necessary. But I'm reluctant to keep adding headcount like that. Using Evolve to find ways to make positions and then come back and try to put them into a budget that's already kind of chock full. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody else? Dr. Francis?
I sent a question in about this, and maybe it wasn't clear. I was trying to understand sort of more long-term what's happened with our head count, because we got sort of a rapid-fire description from Dr. Winters, and in the end, I didn't have enough fingers and toes, I think, to keep track of, you know, there was pluses and there was minuses and things and shifts, and, you know, are we up 5 positions kind of as administrators, teachers, or whatever it was, kind of governing these things? Are we down 2 positions from where we were 5 years ago? Sort of what happened in that time frame, because, you know, I guess it doesn't necessarily change where we are now, but I think it's a lot easier to go to the town and say, listen, they tried cutting out these positions, but it turns out it's created a different stress, and now we'd like to go up a little bit, and we'll still be down from where we were 10 years ago. Or, you know, to say, oh, well, you know, we already went up 5 positions, so maybe it's not really reasonable for us to ask for more. Maybe we really need to look at how we can rearrange that, and it would help me to understand kind of what had happened a little more longer term in terms of that, in terms of headcount.
I did have something in writing, but I'm sorry if I did not get that in or forwarded. I have a little timeline for you.
All right, anybody else on that? I think the timeline would be very helpful. All right, top of page 3, point 2 math teacher for advanced students in middle school. Anybody?
I was wondering how that would work. Is that a 0.2 for each of the middle schools, which would be, or is it 0.2 for the 3 middle schools?
It's 0.2 for the 3 middle schools. The model as is right now. So it would be the one teacher to come from the high school to a central location, and the students are then brought to that one middle school.
So the students then would have to leave school to go to this central location?
Correct. So we schedule it at the end of the day, coordinating with the 3 middle school principals, and we actually have a parent that does pick up the student and brings them to central, and it's actually working very well right now.
So a parent is driving the students
Yes,
to class?
Yes, that's the arrangement as made for this particular school year to support the needs of those students. We're anticipating they'll need to access geometry as well as pre-calculus.
I guess my concern is that doesn't sound very sustainable. What happens when this parents' children move on from this program? I just would worry that somebody else wouldn't step in. The other thing, why are we not exposing them to the course in the high school? Is there any way to do that?
The course is the same as the high school. It's the same curriculum, same expectations. It's actually a teacher from the high school who then comes to the middle schools to deliver. What we have done before, which was not effective, and this was work done with parents, they were accessing the Johns Hopkins course, and this parent group came to us and we worked in partnership. They said it was not as effective as they thought it would be. And so again, we worked with the parents to come to this solution for this year in working with the high school.
Mr. Scher.
I would just maybe be a little bit concerned about losing instructional time and the travel. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Actually, and I've been following up with the parent. There has been no loss of instructional time that the child makes it to the class. Again, I can't speak specifically about the students here, but again, this was done in agreement with the parent and the principals.
Students are traveling though, off-site, right? Is that
one child?
Okay, Mr. Scher.
How many kids are in this program right now?
Right now, we're serving 4 students. Again, you're paying the same tuition, so the amount is essentially, I mean, there's a bit of an offset.
Yeah,
because if we're not doing that, paying the salary, you're paying the tuition in the Johns Hopkins course.
I'm sure these 4 parents, or probably 8 parents, are going to get angry with what I'm going to say, but I'm kind of surprised because this to me is this, you know, diffusion, Jill, I mean, I didn't even know this existed. And I get that our kind of mission is educate every kid to their potential, but at the same time, that can't mean, I mean, we're struggling to get to our algebra goal, and we're doing this. And this is taking, obviously, to manage this thing, takes some level of staff time, teacher time, what have you. You know, this is what this for me is like this conversation about priorities. The bigger priority for me is the hundreds of kids that we need to get to algebra in the middle school. And I'm surprised that we're burning up energy focusing on 4 kids to get them to pre-calculus in middle school. That just is, I'm not sure that's our
You
best
didn't really
investment.
just say that, though. But you
What?
didn't really just say that, because we're a district that's focusing our strategic efforts on personalized learning, which means
I agree with that.
every child,
Yeah, but that's my
Yes.
point. That's my point. My point is that we seem to be doing this in a very traditional way instead of imagining. I mean, maybe we don't like Johns Hopkins.
They tried a pretty innovative way. They partnered with Johns Hopkins. What they're telling you, what the parents and students are telling you, is at the developmental level of these kids, it helps them to have a teacher with them, and perhaps they could be moved to the high school to take the course. But then you have
I'm sorry, Jill.
right,
Let me
you got
finish that
different-
statement. I don't understand, as an example, if this is individualized learning and personalized learning for kids, why it's not done in a way that's maybe with a student, one-on-one, via Skype, via video. I don't understand why we're not thinking, if we're going to do this stuff, because it's diffusion and it costs money, I don't think we're as
So
innovative
whether a
as we
high
could
school teacher takes the period and Skypes these kids, it's still a .2,
be. Yeah,
right? I mean, they're still taking a period to do it. Or whether you're busing them, then there's transportation to the high school.
And we
Right.
could not coordinate with the high school to bus the students up because of their particular rotating schedule. So this was the best solution to meet the needs of the children to access this high-level course. This is part of the advanced studies program at the middle school.
And if we're going to compare to Stevenson, yes, we actually do truck the kids over to the high school, either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. That is what we do. We just bring them over to the high school. So that is the
And we have
practice.
looked at other solutions to where keeping it at each individual middle school and having the teachers do a corollary, that cost is approximately $50,000 to do that model. So this was the most cost-effective way to get the students access to the curriculum that they required at this time.
Dr. Francis?
So 2 things. One is, I agree with meeting students' needs. You know, my son benefited from doing the Algebra 2 in 8th grade, and I don't think it's something where for him it was, you know, somebody was pushing him to get somewhere. This was something where if this wasn't done for him, it would have been a very negative experience for him. I think, it's something where we should be flexible in terms of how we do it. The Hopkins program for him was great. He didn't really need a teacher. I didn't really like the idea of him traveling someplace. This was easy. It was done within school, and it was fine. That's not necessarily going to work for every kid. So I don't know that I would say that we want to take away that option. I would say I'm a little surprised by these numbers because the Hopkins courses typically are in the 1,000, 1,200 per student, and if we're talking about 4 students, that might come out to, 9,000, something like that. So I'm not quite sure how these numbers work out, and personally, and this is so in the weeds, but I'm sorry, that's a very expensive course. I was perfectly happy to pay for my son to do ALEX, which is so much cheaper, but the district insisted on Hopkins, and I'm like, if you want to pay for it, have a good time. So, I do wonder if there might be some other ways that we could be flexible with it, but obviously I support addressing these students' needs, and it doesn't sound like we're talking about a lot of money.
Ms. Doe?
I'm just going to comment on the fact that I think it's wonderful that you're trying to push this for students that need it, because we do need to serve all of our students. But also, it does seem like a reduction in cost, right? You're saying it actually is cheaper than the Johns Hopkins program, so I think that's a good thing. Okay.
Ms. Dayton?
I totally support educating students to their highest potential. That's our mission statement. So this fits very nicely with our mission. And on that note, that's why I feel strongly about the career tech pathway. We are not educating students to their highest potential at the high school level.
Thank you, Ms. Dayton. All right, moving on, unless there's anybody else on this one. We're now on number 9, digital tool resources to support personalized learning in mathematics. Okay, Dr. Francis.
Had to guess I'd comment on this one. I mean, you know, this is a pilot that we asked for. I think we certainly need to support it. I do have some questions. One is, and this is sort of cart before the horse, but you know, we haven't gotten our update on what's happening with the pilot, but is this something we're really ready to roll out for next year? And, you know, the question might be, maybe if we're not ready to roll out, but whatever the next stage would be would cost almost this much, so we should do it anyway. That may be, but just sort of trying to understand some of those issues. And then my assumption would be that we might have some offsets as well that would help balance this. But I don't know how we can try to do a pilot. We can try and understand how we're going to change how we're teaching and not have money for it to make it happen. I think we have to do that.
Yes, I echo this sentiment, but are we ready? Right? We haven't heard any updates on the pilot. Don't know how it's going, and I do note in the comments it says there might be an offset for existing tools. It would be good to know what this budget number really is, on top of knowing whether we've decided this is the right thing to have. Anybody else on this? Dr. Gilday?
I think if our goal in our strategic plan is personalized learning, we should understand there's going to be a cost, and whether it's this particular math supportive tool or whether it is a personalized learning, you know, other piece of software, learning management system, you know, I mean, there is going to be a cost. So I think we have to be realistic in understanding that, with that being our key strategic area, and to look at the very real cost. This is one mathematics supportive software tool that's not to complete the curriculum. This is supplemental. And to look at, so when we think, you know, it's less expensive with technology, I think we have to just recognize and realize that when you are scaling for consistency across the district, there is going to be a number associated with each content area that you have to look at, very much like you used to look at your textbook adoptions. The challenge we have is with technology, it's usually a year-to-year subscription, or a subscription for maybe sometimes 3 years. You know, sometimes they'll bargain, you know, they'll let you bargain with them just like they used to with textbooks. So obviously we always try to do the best number that we can get, but this was a realistic number for the particular tools we are using this year. Will costs go down? Maybe. You know, certainly you always hope so, but we wanted to give you a realistic estimate. And that's, like I said, just one content area, because obviously you would not personalize in one content area. You're going to be personalizing across the curriculum. So we are definitely going to be having to look at platforms that support that and give the teacher the information they need, so that they're not doing everything on, you know, paper pencil, trying to personalize for kids. So this was just the first attempt at that.
So I guess it actually leads me to a logical question, which is, how often are we reviewing the tools that we have to decide whether they're the ones we want for the future? And Phil, you can answer that another day.
There are actually, we've definitely looked at a few ways now of doing that. Pretty cool ways of doing that now that are available on usage, analytics, and then effect analytics.
I look forward to hearing more about that.
And with this particular pilot, it's a real randomized study. I mean, you're actually going to probably be able to do a white paper out of this pilot. So it's very soundly designed from a research perspective.
Staten.
Yeah, I can't think that this cost is sustainable across all our academic areas. And where education is moving now is toward open source. And I would think that we could find a clever way not to spend this money, but to still get personalized digital tools. So I'm not in favor at this time, even though I do support personalized learning.
Mr. Chair.
Just for those people who are not IT people, they think open source means free. Open source is not free. Okay, no, I mean, my point is you can get software for free, but I think our friends at Gartner could give you a gazillion articles on the total cost of ownership associated with open source versus enterprise. The thing we have to be realistic about is open source isn't no cost. There are costs associated with it, maintenance, so on and so forth, but the
you might be able to get the initial software for free. So we should just have in our minds that there's no free ride with that.
All right, I think we'll move on to the next item, which is science research. I think Ms. O'Neill has already commented on that. I don't know if there are any other takers, but I support that. Ms. Dayton?
Yeah, I'm one of those people that says, show me the need, and the wild success in this program does not point to this need. So initially, I don't support it. I cannot see any evidence in the performance of our students in this program that more money was needed to help them to succeed. I think they are succeeding beyond understanding correctly.
My understanding is that parents right now are supporting this program, and not every kid's parent can support this program, and I don't really think it's the role of parents to be paying for student equipment that they need for their research projects. And Mr. Bermonti spends a great deal of money out of his own pocket for this program. So there is a genuine need. And also, if we want to expand it, as it should be, because the demand is there, we need the money. This is a piddly amount of money for a program that has been wildly successful, but based on money not provided by the school system. And it's our job to provide for the education of all our students. Parents shouldn't have to subsidize an essential program that the kids are taking.
All right, if there are no other comments on that, we'll move on to 11, Innovation Lab. Any takers, parents of Innovation Lab students? Dr. Francis?
Well, I suppose being a parent does maybe influence my next question, which was, one of the things I had heard is Innovation Lab hardly uses any textbooks for anything that they do. So has anybody looked at sort of the overall cost and where that might balance out, in terms of if they're not using textbooks, if they're not sort of using some of those standard materials that might be used in other classrooms? Yes, I think it would be reasonable to give them sort of a share to allow them to do the things in the way they do that would be equivalent to other programs. I think, to be equitable, we need to be careful because there has been a sense that this should be a program that runs within the budget of what the schools normally would allot in terms of number of teachers and so forth. So I think that would kind of be helpful to see if there's a way to understand that.
Anyone else on the Innovation Lab? Ms. Dayton?
I really appreciate the description, but it's not clear to me what we would lose if we chose not to include this in the budget. Does that mean that some of our projects that we currently have students engaged in would not occur? Does that mean we would lose some critical outside speakers without which students wouldn't have the perspective and the knowledge base to do the projects? And in terms of outreach, does that mean we're eliminating field trips? Not clear on what we lose.
I think it's listed in the description there, and that's exactly what it says, is that in the past, it's been funded by Greenwich Alliance. So we have to at some point decide with that pilot moving in, if we're going to fund some of those similar experiences that are currently funded by a grant.
I guess one of the things we talked about at a previous meeting is that pilot is up for approval and what the correct timing of that is. So maybe that's something you've given some thought to we can talk about. All right, moving on. Number 12, summer school redesign. I know this has got an amount TBD. Knowing this document was done at the end of October. I don't know if you have an update, Dr. Gilday.
We don't. It's going to depend on the scale of the redesign. If we're going to try to do K-5, if we're going to do K-8, if we're going to try to do K-12, but that'll depend how many people are working with that particular project. So that's to be determined.
Dr. Francis.
Trying to think of the right way to say what just popped into my head, but it would be useful for me to understand what it is that you think we really should be doing versus what the board seems to have been brewing on in terms of kind of making those decisions. I think, again, sort of asking the educators to give us a sense of what they think will be beneficial as opposed to other goals and potentially separating those two issues. So I mean, personally, yes, I'm interested in, you know, what are we going to do for credit recovery at the high school? It's something we've talked a lot about at PGC. We were talking about, you know, something about the task performance, whatever it was. We talked and you said, yes, you think that's something we should do. So trying to understand what things you feel are really important, and that would be useful in terms of understanding what the budget needs are for that.
All right, anybody else? Okay, moving on to number 13, Public Information Officer.
I don't know if you guys have anything you want to say. So this was similar. My friends at Stevenson have 5 people in their communications office. One site, one building, large, but still. So when we're looking at our communications needs, this person, this public information officer, is then the front line as to all of those, almost like a historian, if you want to look at it that way. What we're doing this year is a lot of what I call cultural anthropology, right? Trying to learn the history of the fields and the projects, and searching through documents, trying to find the origin of the Cardinal Field feasibility study. Where did that come from? All of that sort of stuff takes an inordinate amount of time. There's a lot that's required of public information and access with regard to timing, to these responses and requests for materials, as well as just having that sort of repository. So it's creating that role to actually formally do that, rather than me having charges to each of the administrators to go find all these things.
All right, anybody have any comments on that? Ms. Dayton?
Could this role be downgraded, and could we use temporary workers to fulfill some of the searching for documents and compiling histories?
So when we look at organizational development and organizational redesign, I think this is one of those things that I can't imagine not having somebody with this charge, you know, to really be responsive to all of the public requests and to have it be consistent. I'd be afraid if we had it be a piecemeal temporary person, that yes, they could certainly do project work, but it wouldn't be the same contextual. But once they compiled the history of something, you know, then obviously we've got it to move forward.
Ms. Ribbon?
Jill, I also think you talked a lot about PR, so that consistency and just the level of electronic communication. I live at, you know, I have like 4 different email addresses. It's driving me crazy. So just all that we've had to deal with as a board, as you, our new superintendent, that's taken away from sort of the core business at hand is educating our students, is just responding and acknowledging and categorizing and making sure that everybody has the information that they need. So I support this position.
I have 46,000 emails since July. Wow. I'm not on any junk mail lists yet. It's a lot of emails.
Don't be so sure.
If I haven't responded back, I apologize, but it's a lot of emails.
All right, anybody else on that? All right, moving on to number 14, videographer. Aaron, cover your ears. Any comments on videographer? All right, Aaron, you can uncover yours.
I'm sorry. Just to be clear, the roughly 50,000 is after taking into account the 18,800?
Okay, moving on to the top of page 4, number 15, website monitoring system. Anybody? Ms. Dayton.
Kim, I'm willing to show my ignorance, but I would think hiring Final Site, that they have under law a requirement to help us with this?
Not exactly, because they don't post the content. It's about the content that we're posting. To some degree, they are managing from the design elements, the design templates that we use. They are checking and making sure that those are compliant. But the content itself is, we own it, we post it, they don't cover that. They wouldn't go in and they would not adjust our content, our videos, our PowerPoints, our documents. So it's up to us to do that. They do have a company that they work with too. They partner with. This is just based on one company that has submitted proposals to us. There are others. We would probably do a bid if we went down this route. But Site Improve, the company cited here, has done a free scan for us, which we're going to get the results of this week, to identify, the scale and scope of what we're dealing with, just how much work it would, much more work it would be to become completely accessible. We've already done a lot of work in the past year with the webmasters to get to that point.
Anybody else on that? All right, the next one is a related topic, number 16, video transcription services. That's about accessibility.
It is about accessibility, and it's largely about the videos that we post to the website. This budgeted amount is based pretty much solely on board meetings on an annual basis. So it's a conversation that we need to have with the Board of Education at some point soon. We have quite a history of videos on the website that are not compliant, and we will have to discuss the degree to which we go back and closed caption them and or remove them and have them requested and closed caption as needed, depending on the request. That conversation needs to be had. And then this is a conversation, this 12,000 is about moving forward. Do you want to close caption every video and continue to post them online?
And we have an estimated cost of $2.50 per minute, and we've got a tendency to have really long meetings.
So there may be some incentives there, and we looked at 3 transcription closed captioning services, and that's the midpoint number.
Mr. Scherer.
Jill, can we get I'd be very surprised. I mean, I don't know when that law came in, but first of all, I think we need to, we've used this stuff as our public records, right? And I think we found out in the last year that, there was a whole set of issues with that. So, but I would also be surprised if we have that regulatory requirement to go back. There's probably a date by which we were required to go back. I would be surprised how far back it is. Usually that stuff's not retro. So if we need to do this for regulatory for compliance, we have to do it. I don't like the idea at all of removing public records out of public view. That's probably not a good idea.
Well, officially the minutes are public records. The videos are an addendum to that. We can probably check with FOIA and we can talk to the
No, I know.
about that.
We've been over this, but in a lot of cases we were using that because if you looked at our actual minutes, and I think we've corrected that now, but previously some of our minutes were not as extensive because we thought we were using these instead. And then when we learned you're not allowed to do that, now the minutes that we've been doing now are properly prepared. But we did have situations earlier where minutes were not like that because we were relying on this idea that we were allowed to use these videos in lieu of that. I think we now know we're not allowed to do that. The FOIA Commission's been very clear about that. That's why I'm worried about the going back part. I think we're doing the right thing going forward. I'd be worried about the going back.
Certainly something I think we can look into.
Quick.
Just from our recent CABE, my understanding is the legal requirements of minutes are quite bare. I think we tend to put a lot in them, but they basically were like, you put the topic, you put the votes, that's all you're actually required to do. So I'm just a little worried about saying that our minutes weren't adequate. I haven't looked at that carefully, but it seems like that legal requirements, to my understanding, were quite minimal.
We'll put that in the parking lot.
I think the interesting piece, though, being new, is asking people to go back and watch videos to learn the history of the district is really time consuming, and people have done it, certainly. I mean, that's how Lori got the financial system, kind of underway. That's how we found out that Cardinal Field feasibility started in October of 16. So we find things out that way, but it's a really time-intensive way to find out district history. Probably not the easiest to maneuver.
I guess, Jill, I was saying something different. The general practice of open government in Greenwich has been all of these organizations are effectively taping and posting.
I know, and I think all of us are going to be, I think there will be unintended consequences of the enforcement of this particular,
right, for all of us,
for all public entities.
That's what we need to hear more. We need to hear what the actual requirements are, because if we have to invest in this, we have to invest in this.
Yes, this is something Kim, I think, helped teach Tom Mooney's office about. She's done so much research and study on it, so she really has a good handle on it and has been looking at it for over 6 months, longer than I've known her.
All right. Item 17 is the policy revision migration to CAPE format. I know there's a thumbs up over there. I'm going to give a thumbs up. There's another one. We've got 3. Any other thumbs up? Ms. O'Neill, that's 4. We need 1 more. Come on. All right, we've got one down there for Ms. Doe. We would like to see this added to the budget, I believe. All right, moving on. Number 18, convert HR staffing specialist, GEA, to HR assistant director, GOSA.
So this is when Marge retires, which we hate to see Marge retire, but when she does, we're seeing that as just a slight offset of the current cost.
Okay, anybody else on that? All right, moving on to 19, infrastructure services.
I had asked about this, I think, mostly because I was feeling a little annoyed that it sounded like we were given something from the town, it doesn't do what it needs to do, and now we're going to have to spend more money. Did it? I'm not sure I understood the answer that well, but that's still how I feel about it.
This is the E-rate item.
Yeah, good evening. You have 2 issues in this instance. The first issue is that the town budgets net of the E-rate grant. They're budgeting in anticipation of the E-rate grant, which, based on my contacts in the industry and our E-rate grant consultant, that is something they don't advise. The second issue is that we had the state of Connecticut, which you'll see on the next line, line 20, maybe I shouldn't say this now, but we're provided access to the backbone of the internet through the Connecticut Education Network. This was provided free to districts until a little more than a year ago, at which point, due to the fiscal situation in the state of Connecticut, the governor's office started sending districts bills for that service. So those are the 2. Oh.
Can I speak?
Sure.
Isn't there also a problem at the federal level? We're getting defunded from the federal level too. So we have no Fed funding, we have no state funding. We have no town funding now. So we have to build it into our budget.
Yeah, so that heightens the concern that I spoke of in the former, that first concern, that most of our signals, which are pretty reliable, are saying the question of E-rate going away is when, not if. And every year we say we have another year. So it's probably not advisable to budget $200,000 for $300,000 of services. Those services specifically are our firewall services, which we actually were able to obtain cheaper than what the town used to obtain them at. The town used to budget approximately $150K. We rebid the services over this past summer. We got those services for $110K per annum. And our fiber optic connectivity services that light up both the premise of Havemeyer, which is one of our hubs, GHS, which is another hub, and then fan out to our schools. Those services run in excess of about $170K.
So if I'm hearing you right, Phil, some of this, the first item is at least a budgeting issue, it's a budget shortfall. The town's predicting, or part of it at least, is the town is predicting they're going to get some money, and so they're not budgeting for that.
That's correct.
All right, and both of these are required, right? These are federally mandated.
If we like the internet, it's here to stay.
Yeah. Well, we like personalized learning and devices, so.
So we're getting just those few that we've said yes on, basically are getting us pretty close to those 3 buses.
Well, that's how this works, unfortunately. All right. Moving on, 21, Classroom Technology Replacement Program. I do remember last year being one of the people that promoted putting off replacing whiteboards or smart boards. So I understand why this might be here. Any comments, questions, thoughts?
This is the smart board?
Yeah, this is, I think, the smart board. Right, Phil, we put you off last year.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, we have approximately, round numbers, 550 smart boards and displays. It's about 95% smart boards installed throughout the district. So we should be budgeting to maintain that value, approximately 300,000 plus per year. Because again, in just asset management, you don't want to stagger payments to kind of get over one hump of 1 year, only to have to come and have you want a smooth, burn rate on what you're spending to maintain things. So given what happened last year and the realities of last year, we're trying to get back to something that puts us on a path to changing the mix of classroom displays even further. We've been going with the LED TV panels, especially because much of our instructional model is personalized learning. So we're doing less of the lecture model and kind of everyone looking at the same thing. So we're not over investing in that model to the tune of $5,000 per classroom, which is what we used to do. We're now south of $2,000 with installation per classroom when we install new TV units. So we're trying to just land the ship smoothly over a period of years.
Any other thoughts, comments? All right, moving on to page 5, number 22, Centralized Software Program. And it has a amount of a dash. Does that mean it costs nothing to do?
Sorry. Apologize, I was caucusing for a moment. So this line, are we on 22 still?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I apologize. We are consolidating the software portfolio as we've been discussing, because what we find is organizationally, our software cost is primarily driven by headcount. So with the Office of the CIO and Research being the institutional owner of headcount, we thought we can get a more targeted spend, because ultimately when people budget for software, there's a lag between the reality as they know it at the time and then the reality as we see it every day. So what I'm trying to say is we expect that this is something that's going to be cost neutral in the short run and likely cost saving in the longer term, and that longer term being within a year as we execute this accounting change. I'm sorry?
Mr. Chair? Mike?
This is Rogue IT?
I'm sorry.
This is Rogue IT? Is that what you're talking about? No. Because that's very normal in an organization.
Yeah.
Very, totally typical. Millions of organizations go through that. Is that what you're talking about?
In the general world, this is, if we walk into a hospital, if we walk into a financial services institution, right. This is just commonplace that...
Right. So, but I'm sorry, let me just clarify what it is. You're saying that there's spend happening in departments individually, and you guys are talking about centralized control of that, right?
Control is a strong word, but yeah, centralized coordination.
Control is actually not a negative word. In the rest of the world, it's not a negative word. It's just having it systematized and, is that what you're talking about?
Having it systematized, the research function that lives in the CIO's office has the best sense on just kind of the enrollment trends, the day-to-day ebb and flow, the high watermark of what that count will be that drives the software cost. So we think that...
And you're saying it's cost neutral?
Cost neutral in the short run, and we strongly feel that it will be cost saving in the
even better. But if it's cost neutral forever, it's a wash, right?
Correct.
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. 23 and 24, maybe we take those together because they seem interrelated. Let's talk in the forms management system.
Needed across departments. So as Kim and Phil decide who's going to answer, it's needed across departments. And we've been talking about this for quite some time. Let's Talk is just one customer relationship management program. It fits in with some of the other services we have with our website, etc. But basically it would be a way to aggregate those topical messages that are coming in. So basically instead of getting 46,000 separate emails,
people could submit their topic, fields, safety, transportation, whatever the issue is, and then that would aggregate and provide us information on how much of an issue it is, how widespread is the topic, and we could actually provide analytics for you as to what those things are that are the hot button items or topics that we're hearing about. So it's something that I thought could have been implemented instantly here. However, everything has a process and a cost, and we could not get 3 separate line items to jive for this particular year, but it's something where I think it would be very helpful for us as a system, and I think a lot of districts are using things like this.
Ms. Deaton?
So I'm going to be an efficiency maverick here and ask that you please talk to the town about a single form management system or a single aggregator, because I really don't think the school district by itself should be spending money on this. This is something we can do as a town.
Anybody else? Jill, I don't know why we're talking about this. This is 25-year-old technology. This is not new. By the way, 46,000 doesn't put me off. Talk to anybody in business. But why is this an item? Why isn't this just something we're doing?
I think it's interesting in some of the, I don't know that all of the board members even realize, things are not happening in Greenwich Public Schools at the push of a button, right? We are not very automated. It's a lot of time when we're doing any of this kind of aggregation work, so it's an issue because we don't have it. So, I think that's why it's coming up. I also think there's a more detailed communications reason with regard to the print shop on some of the forms management. Is that true, Kim?
Well, it's one of the forms. There's as Jill's describing, there are a number of areas where we are not systematized and where we are not, we do not have online forms access. And forms can be many different things. Literally forms, for example, a registration form. It could be facilities use, it could be surveys. So we have a current system that we use for surveys. This management system could replace that. For the print shop, for example, we do have an online tracking system. It's kind of like a glorified Excel spreadsheet kind of thing, but it doesn't allow us to receive orders online that goes right into the tracking and data management system. So we want the combination, order the print shop items online, and then that just automatically fuels. Right now we're hand entering all of the orders that we get from the print shop, and now we've combined, town and Board of Ed. So there are discrete forms, processes, and management systems for a number of these functions. We've looked at a registration and residency verification process that seems very robust. We've looked at print shop dedicated for that, but this particular solution, and we're looking at, weighing back and forth, what's better, the discrete individual dedicated to a particular purpose systems versus a generalized system that we can adapt for any need.
So it's kind of an in the weeds conversation here,
Yeah,
because to me, if you've got the money, if we've got the money allocation, we can go ahead and do this. We're just giving you the detail, but I think it's interesting that things are not as modernized as I would have thought coming to Greenwich.
In the rest of the world,
correct.
Okay, all these administrative assistants, disappeared out of organizations, not that they disappeared as people, they were repurposed to retrain for something else. But it's because all of these processes long ago got automated. I'm sitting here, I'm back on the synergy conversation. I'm wondering why the board is discussing an investment that obviously should be made. What is it we're doing that's getting in the way of this? Doesn't need to wait till next year. It should happen like yesterday, because if you automate this stuff, you get to that point where you provide a better level of service to parents, better level of service to students, and meanwhile, you want to get at the reducing 80 hours. Part of the reason it's 80 hours is because all this stuff is manual and complicated and what have you. I'm wondering what I guess I'm on the point of why does this need to come to us? Isn't this just something, what are we doing that's getting in the way of you just being able to do this?
Well, because we're trying to plan the budget for 18 months from now, which is always an interesting challenge, to try to predict with the crystal ball, you know, what all of your needs are going to be. So literally, we literally did not really have the money to order each of you a Robert's Rules book, an updated book. We really didn't have the money for that. We really don't have the money allocated for these things. I could not find 3 line items to take a little bit out of communications, a little bit out of tech, and a little bit out of superintendent to do this Let's Talk. It could have been a 3-day project. I mean, we were ready to launch, and then we've got no funding source to be able to do it, because in Greenwich, we seem to see the budget, once we pass it, as like a checkbook ledger rather than an estimate of what our costs are going to be. So it's a very different way. I mean, they literally...
But isn't that what we have monthly transfers for?
What?
Isn't that what we have monthly transfers for?
I'm telling you that we are that tight. So last year when you had an interim superintendent, you basically zeroed out his budget. So basically, you know, I don't have, I mean, I don't have $100 for postage. So it's, so we centralized that to purchasing, so that I could mail a letter, mail a postcard. That's why we use email instead, I guess. But there are definitely modernizations that are needed. So besides, you know, all the things we're talking about with some fun kinds of projects and design of programming and all that kind of stuff that's really great and energizing, we really have to get at some of these things. And while it is definitely an in the weeds, pick a unique little thing, I guess what we're saying is the budget is that tight. Where we don't think it's that tight, it's that tight.
Maybe we get a show of support for this item. Interest?
Qualified support. We took on the print shop to help the town. The town needs to help us to acquire automated systems to help us run more efficiently. I will not vote for this if we're taking on new spending in our budget that was delivered to us by the first selectman. I will not support it. So if we can share the cost with the town, I'm all for it.
All right, I think we'll move on. Item 25, Medicaid billing services. I know there's a cost to this, but there's also an opportunity for reimbursement. Do we have any sense of what we expect that to be, Mary?
We've had estimates between $300,000 and $400,000.
Yeah, it seems kind of worth it. I think there's some support here.
Yeah.
Any questions about this one? The revenue goes to the town, however, I can't imagine. No, Mary's going to tell us different.
In the passing of the legislation that requires all towns to bill back to Medicaid, there was specific language, I don't have it in front of me, but I can get it for you, that says that the money has to go back to the school district.
We would love to see that language.
I'd love to see that cash.
I think we can work together on this one. All right, item 26, 3 additional buses. I think, Lori, you told us that this was coming out because it was already in the budget. Is that right? It's already in the budget, so we can cross that one out. Yes, you can reduce the bottom line by that. Yes. All right, are there any other topics anybody would like to discuss regarding the budget?
So I don't understand where we are.
I was gonna say
Jill asked an original question, which is, we just kind of skipped over. So your question was, what was the level of tolerance to increase? Did we just figure it out by just adding up 4 or 5 items in here, or what did we just?
Well, I think that's
because a lot of these
exactly
items we just didn't say anything about.
Some of the items we didn't show any preference for. Some of the items we showed a clear preference for. The busing is an offset, so that's $252,000 that actually becomes available at the same budget number. I think what I would ask of the superintendent, if this makes sense to her, is that she go back, take the list of the items that we discussed, and show us what the overage would be.
Okay, so we're essentially, I'm just trying to get to the punchline here. So by adding this up, we've probably added, I don't know, $100,000 or whatever more, $200,000 more. So what we're really saying is, we want you to stay at the 2.19. Is that the takeaway?
So I was going to ask the process question, which is, I don't feel like we had a couple of kind of straw votes. Wasn't sure exactly what was sort of official here. I wasn't sure, I was wondering, is the process that at our next meeting, we'll make it official? There's a couple ways I could imagine it. One is we go item by item. One is we say, well, we're willing to go X amount over, and we leave the superintendent to decide within that. I'm wondering how as a board we want to go through this, because I haven't seen this happen in the past, so I'm not quite sure how we want to approach it.
I mean, we can do it any which way, but I think at the end of the day, the best thing to do is for the superintendent to take the list that we went through tonight, the items where there was a clear indication to let us know what it would take to get to that. I think if there are other items after that board members want to try to add in, we will have the meeting on the 9th, or the 12th, I'm sorry, and then again on the 21st. So there's 2 more bites at this apple.
Is there a possibility of each of us prioritizing this list and then giving that as a signal? Then Jill can look at it and realize what we feel is important. Otherwise, what we've just gone through is sort of not useful if we say, okay, now Jill, go ahead and decide what you want to decide. I mean, I just think we need some priorities.
We were asked to do that twice already. I know some of us have done that, and now we've just gone through it ad nauseum. That's my new favorite word. So what more do you need, Jill, from us?
I need to know the tolerance level of going at or above the guideline. Because honestly, yes, the A's and B's are already prioritized for you based on mandates, things we have to do or would like to do. So you've got that, you've got kind of the A and B list, you've got preferences. You understand hopefully some of these program service adds a little bit more after the discussion, but really they were all needed. That was the issue. And as I said, this was not a let's dream big kind of list. This was a what do we need to help launch strategic plan initiatives and keep those moving. So that's what we were attempting to do. So in other words, we kind of feel like we need all 30. But if you're telling me we can't go over guideline, then we have to reduce.
Mr. Sheriff.
Jill, have you, since the election a month ago, have you had any further conversations with the BET about are they sticking to the guideline? Are they modifying the guideline? Have you heard anything from them?
I've not heard anything from them.
Is that a question we should ask?
Why would we ask that question? The reason we have published guidelines is that we have heard from a 12-member board on what they think we should be spending. I don't want to go back and ask them. But I am confused as to why we seem to be so focused on bringing in a budget at 2.19%. No one said that was our guideline. Why are we doing that? Every time we talk about making an addition to the budget, we talk about the 3 buses and we have to maneuver ourselves into that spending pattern. That's not our guideline. Where did that come from?
Jill, I'm interested in submitting a budget to answer your question at the guideline. And I'd like to understand from the administration what that winds up meaning. I mean, if you're asking for feedback, candidly, I do think you should ask, because if they're going to modify the guideline and increase it, well, then that's a helpful and important piece of information to have. If they're not, and they're going to stay with what they've got, then we've got that. I would like to understand, to answer your question, if we're at guideline, what does it mean for the district? I'd also like to see a sensitivity analysis that said if you were going to go up a half a point above that, what would be in, what would be out? If you were going up a point, what would be in, what would be out? I'm very interested, instead of us, I'm not comfortable going through this stuff. I can give you an opinion on it. But I think the real thing, it's better, because these line items are part of an integrated program, and I'm pretty clear I don't understand all the connections. I think the administrators are better people to understand the connections. So I'd rather, at different levels of tolerance, right? At guideline, half a point above, another half a point above, what would you recommend? And then I feel like I'd be in a much better position to give you an answer about, to your original question, which is, what is the interest of the board to go higher? And probably embedded in that is how much higher, right? I would think, I don't know.
Just a point of information, the new BET does not get seated until January. So you're going back and asking the same board basically at this point. Ms. Dayton?
Look, we have to pass our budget before the new board is seated. This conversation isn't going anywhere. I don't think it's productive in any way. We have published guidelines. If anyone needs to refer to them, please pull them up online and take a look at them. We know what the guidelines are. I would like to see tonight's discussion incorporated into financial figures that are brought back to the board by the superintendent. I do not need the board to reprioritize what we just discussed. I think we have a clear sense of the majority view on here. And from the Q&A round. And then I think the next meeting is our starting point. We start again and we say, is this a budget that reflects the needs of all the students in the district? And if not, we can reevaluate.
Dr. Francis?
So I'm comfortable adding items that are from our programs and services list. I think we cut our budget a little too lean in our attempts to fit outside requests, and I think we're suffering a bit from that. I think there are changes here that are going to make us much more efficient. Having said that, I do know we've talked a lot about a really big review of our programs and services coming up. So I'm hoping that we may find some efficiencies, maybe once we get some busy work out of the way and our cabinet can do more what they're supposed to be doing as for you as well, to work on these things. So I think there are some places I would see being comfortable adding. I didn't feel like we were doing an official vote now, so I think there's ones I didn't comment on, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't necessarily support it. I just didn't have questions. I think that's where we didn't really have a process for how to do this. So, I'm not quite sure exactly what I think the best way is to move forward, but I am supporting adding on additional things if we feel that that's what we need, and I think we do, to really run the district the way it should be done. And I think our job is to say what that is, and I'm comfortable with that.
Dr. Gilday, do you feel like you have enough information to go forward?
Certainly. We will work with this information.
All right, so additional written comments on the capital and operating budget are due December 4th. There'll be a Google Doc to add those comments into. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Dr. Francis. All right. We are adjourned.